Allow me 1 minute to greet all the participants, my dear brothers and sisters ambassadors, and a particular thank you to you, Valerie, and to Cynthia. I think we start our triangular partnership in a very strong way, and we three are driven by supporting Africa, putting people at the center of policymaking. Thank you, Valerie. Thank you, Cynthia. With these greetings, allow me to give the floor to Gary, who will be our moderator. Gary, please, resident coordinating Jamaica. Gary, please.
Thank you so much, USG Duarte. Good morning, Excellencies, colleagues, participants. My name is Gary Cunille, and I am the UN Resident Coordinator in Jamaica. I will serve as your moderator today, and I would like to welcome you all to day 2 of the High-Level Policy Dialogue. During this session, as you well know, we will be discussing social protection's role in enhancing food security and nutrition for greater resilience in Africa. We will first hear from our 2 distinguished keynote speakers, Ms. Valerie Guarnieri and Ms. Cynthia Samuel Olanjuwan. We will then invite speakers who had pre-registered to make their contributions. And after the pre-registered speakers, we will have an opportunity to hear from other participants who want to share their views on this important topic. You will have the opportunity to do so by sharing your questions or requests for the floor through the chat. Obviously, in view of the focus of the session and the limited time available, we will be giving pre-registered speakers and member state representative a certain level of priority. Please also note that French, Portuguese, and Arabic interpretation will be available through the session, and let us know if you're having any trouble with that. Now that we've set the stage, and without any further delay, it is my great pleasure to give the floor to Ms. Valerie Guarnieri, Assistant Executive Director of the World Food Programme. Ms. Guarnieri, over to you.
Thank you so much, Gary, and it's lovely to see you since our days together in East Africa. And I really want to warmly thank the UN Office of the Special Advisor on Africa, and in particular, Her Excellency, my sister, Ms. Cristina Duarte, for giving WFP the opportunity to contribute to the 2022 Africa Dialogue Series and allowing me to take the floor in today's high-level policy dialogue. We've been honored to co-lead with ILO the 3rd week of this edition, which focused on a subject that deeply resonates with our work across the continent. And from providing cash transfers to making school feeding and other national social protection schemes more nutrition sensitive and responsive to shocks, WFP has a long history of working with partners to support African governments scale up and enhance safety nets, in particular for the most vulnerable. And this includes providing support to over 30 African nations in implementing social protection responses during the COVID-19 pandemic. But we need to do more, and we need to act together. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this year of unprecedented humanitarian need sets off an alarm bell that we cannot ignore. The joint impact of conflict, climate shocks, and economic crises continues to drive food insecurity and malnutrition exponentially. The protracted socioeconomic effects of COVID-19 and the rising costs of food and energy resulting from the conflict in Ukraine are expected to worsen this situation. This year, over 100 million people across countries on the continent are projected to be in acute food insecurity, and that's a stark 22% increase from just 1 year ago. Further, millions of children will suffer from wasting, the most lethal form of malnutrition and one of the top threats to child survival. 6.3 million children in Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, and Senegal alone. And this represents the 5th year in a row with record high levels of acute malnutrition across the region. We cannot keep on doing business as usual. We need greater commitment, investments, and coordination if we want to address the nutrition challenges on the continent and strengthen resilience to future crises. Social protection is a powerful tool to help the most vulnerable. It helps them mitigate the worst effects of economic crisis, natural disasters, and conflict. It helps combat inequalities and creates a pathway to more stable and prosperous societies, leaving no one behind as we go. The discussion that WFP and ILO co-hosted has emphasized the urgent need to scale up and expand social protection, which is also a key tenet of the Secretary General's common agenda. And this includes through placing food security and nutrition front and center in shock responsive social protection mechanisms. And I just want to reiterate some of the key messages that emerged last week during the ADS webinar facilitated by WFP and ILO. First and foremost, to effectively advance nutrition for greater resilience in the continent, social protection must support inclusion, as diverse inequalities are often intersecting with malnutrition. And in doing so, we need to prioritize the needs of the most nutritionally vulnerable, such as infants, young children, pregnant and breastfeeding women, and those for whom the gap is largest, who are unable to meet their nutrient needs. And this was very well highlighted by the Honorable Minister Navine El-Kabag, who talked about national social safety nets targeting Egypt's most vulnerable pregnant women and mothers of children under 2 years of age in collaboration with WFP and other partners as part of the response to the COVID-19 crisis. We also call on policymakers to deliberately incorporate food security and nutrition objectives into social protection strategies, policies, and programs to support people's well-being now and into the future. And as highlighted by Her Excellency Amina Mohammed during the webinar, nutrition-sensitive school meals programs across the continent are a key investment to the health and well-being of future generations, with multiplier effects on education, social cohesion, and economic development. And African member states have made tremendous strides in expanding school meals programs across the continent, increasing their budget allocations, adopting rigorous policy frameworks for school feeding, and improving the quality of school health and nutrition interventions. And the African Union, the AU Development Agency, NEPAD, and more than 29 African countries have recently joined the School Meals Coalition, committing to ensuring that all children have access to a healthy, nutritious meal in school by 2030. And this is a crucial step towards reaching those 60 million children on the African continent who still don't have access to meals in school. And lastly, WFP and ILO call on adopting resilient and shock responsive approaches that better help people in managing risks during sudden emergencies or seasonal stressors, while promoting coordination among actors on the ground across the humanitarian, development, and peace nexus. In the example that was brought forward by the High Commissioner of Niger's 3N initiative, His Excellency Ali Beti, demonstrates that preventive action, early warning systems, and improved coordination among different government bodies can indeed ensure greater effectiveness during recurring droughts, preventing deteriorations in the food security and nutritional status of the population. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this year we have an incredible opportunity to progress towards the African Union Agenda 2063 with actions that can help mitigate the current crisis and build a prosperous and equitable future for the continent. Please don't let the alarm bell go unheard. WFP and the entire United Nations family stands ready to support the African Union and its member states to shift the needle on malnutrition across the continent, ensuring better access to social protection systems that help meet food security and nutrition needs, leaving no one behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Valerie, for first setting the stage, second, defining really an ambitious and very concrete agenda, and telling us that it is possible if we're able to do more and work together. Now, without further delay, we will be hearing also later, as I mentioned, from the two pre-registered panelists, Her Excellency Ms. Matu Joyini, and later from His Excellency Mr. Claver Gatete, Permanent Representative of Rwanda. But now let's go quickly to our second keynote speaker, Ms. Cynthia Samuel Olonjuwan, Assistant Director General of the International Labour Organization. Cynthia, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Gary, and thanks a million for pronouncing my name right. It's not very, very common, so I want to acknowledge that and to thank you. Let me start by really congratulating my dear sister, USG Christina Duarte, for a very successful, but also very substantive ADS 2022. Kudos to you. Thank you for bringing us together, and thank you for what has happened over the last couple of weeks. I also thank our colleagues from the World Food Programme, and I particularly thank Valerie for the very good collaboration that enabled us to deliver the third week of the ADS. And it's really wonderful working together with you on this very important area. The high-level dialogue reiterates the importance of social protection systems in enhancing not just food security and nutrition, but the resilience of African countries. Our conversation today is very, very timely. The impact of COVID-19 on the world of work has been devastating and far-reaching. According to the most recent ILO monitor that was released on Monday, a couple of days ago, hours worked declined in Africa by 4.1%. From the fourth quarter of 2019 to the first quarter of 2022. And this translates to the equivalence of about 16 million full-time jobs. This has exacerbated poverty. It has also exacerbated inequalities around gender, economic, and social. The FAO's estimates also show us that the pandemic has pushed 47 million Africans into extreme poverty, while adding 46 million people to those who are at risk of hunger and undernourishment. Furthermore, as was said earlier, the war in Ukraine has worsened the food and nutrition security of several African countries. Climate change impacts, especially in rural, agricultural, and coastal communities, has continued to affect livelihoods, food, and nutrition securities. These multiple crises have exposed the glaring gaps in social protection and underscored the very worrisome consequences of the insufficient coverage of social protection, particularly among workers in the informal economy. And for Africa, this covers 83% of those who work. Social protection, as was indicated also earlier by Valerie, provides a crucial buffer by protecting families, enabling women and men to be resilient and to be able to proactively rebuild their lives, their communities, and societies. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, currently only 46.9% of the global population is effectively covered by the most basic form of social protection, which means that about 4.14 billion people are left unprotected. In Africa, the situation is even more dire, with only 17.4% being covered by the most basic form of social protection. This means that about 1.4 billion Africans have no access to the most fundamental, the most basic form of social protection. And this gap between what is required and what is available is totally unaccepted in the year 2022. And the pandemic has really helped to reveal the importance of us bridging the gap. And the huge coverage gap is associated with a significant underinvestment in social protection in Africa. The level of investment of social protection is only 5% of GDP in Africa, compared to the global average of 8.6%, and this is 2020. During the conversation last week, the ADS conversation last week, a variety of stakeholders, including governments, workers, business, and those in the academia, all recognize the pressing need to address the root causes of the insecurities in Africa, as well as the instability. And they called for increased investments in social protection, particularly through domestic resource mobilization as a way of enhancing sustainability. The panel challenged all of us to do more. The panel also challenged all of us to do more now if we're to achieve the aspirations of the SDG 2030, as well as the AU Agenda 2063. Indeed, we must do things differently. We must move the needle substantively in the direction of social justice and the life of dignity for Africans. But what does this entail? First, it means that we ensure universal, comprehensive, and adequate social protection throughout the life cycle. This should support the inclusion of people with diverse and often intersecting vulnerabilities and inequalities. As Professor Adesina rightly pointed out, this should include considerations on the adequacy of the benefits proposed to reach the desired outcome. This is particularly true when it comes to cash transfers, which often are too little to break the cycle of poverty. It is imperative, it is urgent, it is almost mandatory that we move from a charity approach to a more productive and a human rights approach. Secondly, we must strengthen the governance of social protection systems through effective institutional leadership, multi-stakeholder coordination, social dialogue, as well as innovative solutions, including those that are made available through digital technologies. It is only by adopting an integrated approach that we can build synergies across sectors, notably employment, agriculture, health, and education sectors. And by doing that, we'll be able to enhance coverage, adequacy, comprehensiveness, quality, and the responsiveness of social protection systems. This multi-stakeholder engagement and integrated policy approach underlines the United Nations Secretary General's initiative on the Global Accelerator on Jobs and Social Protection for Just Transitions. And the Global Accelerator is aimed at supporting countries to create at least 400 million jobs and extend social protection to the people currently not yet covered by the year 2030. Thirdly, it is crucial that we ensure the sustainability of social protection by prioritizing long-term, reliable, and equitable forms of financing, focusing on increased allocation of domestic resources complemented by support from international organizations. It's also important to underscore the fact that in the face of short-term fiscal constraints that many countries are facing, we must stay the course of adequate and comprehensive social protection in line with international labor standards. We must be vigilant that the reform proposals in face of current fiscal and hopefully transient constraints do not reverse the policy gains that we have achieved in this sphere. The ILO has a wealth of experience and expertise to support countries in not only building, but also sustaining effective social protection systems. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Odije, the Deputy Secretary General of the International Trade Union Congress for Africa, reiterated that African governments now appreciate the need to extend social protection and thus must find innovative solutions to expand the fiscal space necessary to adequately and sustainably invest in social protection. This is possible, he posits, from combating illicit financial flows and responsive taxation. He reminded us that during the pandemic, while the fiscal space of countries was shrinking, the 3 richest men in West Africa had their income increased by $17 billion. Today, all countries are at a crossroad, facing a choice over the future of the social protection systems. The Africa Regional Social Protection Strategy 2021 to 2025, which was launched last year in collaboration with my sister, the USG, provides a clear way forward for very practical and urgent work that will ensure that we leave no one behind in Africa. It aims to support African countries to accelerate social protection coverage to reach 40% of the continent's population by 2025. This will require that African countries act decisively on many fronts. Building strategic partnerships at the national, regional, and international levels will be key to unlocking policy and fiscal solutions, and will reform and transform national social protection systems and thereby achieve the SDGs and Africa's Agenda 2063. As I close, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, scaling up action to achieve universal social protection is now more than ever a necessity, which is clear to all stakeholders. Please recall that last week, universal social protection was identified as a key commitment, which was reiterated by the global community in the Durban Call for Action on the elimination of child labor. Now is the time for us to take decisive action and create the Africa we want. And we'll do this by accelerating social protection and pursuing a high road policy approach with vigor that will enable us have a renewed social contract in Africa. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Cynthia, and well said. Insufficient coverage of social protection, 4 billion people left unprotected, 4 billion of which live in Africa. The need, the investment way too low, the need for us to ensure comprehensive social protection, the need to think about an integrated approach, the need for sustainability, all very important points. And already we're seeing lots of comments in the chat. But let us first go to our pre-registered panelists. Let me now hand over the floor to Her Excellency Ms. Matu Joyini, Permanent Representative of South Africa to the United Nations. Excellency, over to you.
Thank you very much, Gary, and good morning to all excellencies, to all distinguished delegates. Let me start by thanking OSA for organizing an excellent 2022 African Development Series to reflect on different topics of great importance to our continent, Africa. And my sister, I always appreciate what you put together and really put in the energy, and we're seeing the results of that. And I'm particularly pleased to take part in a discussion on the importance of social protection in enhancing food security and nutrition. There is no country today that is an advanced economy that did not implement social protection measures for its population in its process of development. Social protection measures are meant, as we heard earlier, to support livelihoods and the health of society. And it was interesting this morning, just watching, I think it was BBC, and you just realize that already the measures that have been put in place in the UK to support the most vulnerable. And of course, I couldn't help but think about where we are today and the discussion that we're having today, and the fact that would we be able to, in our continent, to do precisely what the UK is doing, just like that, as quickly as that. And we know that it's happening also here in the US. Our sister Cynthia has just mentioned some of the statistics that we need to be aware of. The fact that 4 billion citizens of the world are without any cover of social security, and 1.4 of those are in Africa. And the fact that the African continent has the lowest social security coverage in the world, at 17% of our population covered, compared to the global average of 47%. And further gave some statistics in terms of a percentage of GDP that goes into that coverage, where we are at 5%, whereas the global average is at 8.6. The COVID-19 pandemic showed us the positive impact of social protection measures. Those countries with social protection systems were able to cushion their populations from the worst effects of the pandemic. And countries without these measures suffered more. But some countries, including my own country, South Africa, were also able to introduce additional social protection measures to deal with the socioeconomic impact of the pandemic on our people. For us, the government introduced the COVID-19 social relief of distress cash grant to all citizens above 18 who are unemployed and who are not receiving any other form of social protection. We also implemented a social relief of distress food parcels program to all South African citizens permanent residents, and refugee in need. All these were welcome interventions, assisting households to meet their basic needs at a crucial time when jobs were lost and economic activities suspended. And these were additional to our already existing and permanent social protection measures, such as those for the aged, for people living with disabilities, and child support grants, which currently in South Africa reach more than 60% of our total household. Moderator, the fact that the world is witnessing a rather slow economic recovery from COVID-19 is another reason why we need to put social protection high in the political agenda of our countries. And we should use the experience of COVID-19 really to accelerate actions towards meeting SDG target 1.3, which calls for all countries to implement nationally appropriate social protection systems and measures for all, including floors, and by 2030, achieve substantial coverage of the poor and the vulnerable. Therefore, as we emerge from the pandemic, we should not diminish the current focus on social protection. Rather, this should be a window we use opportunistically to advance the spread of social protection in all our countries. Nowhere is the sustained focus on social protection required more than in Africa because of the reality that we lag behind the rest of the world in investments in social protection. We should not forget that COVID-19 and climate change and the food security challenges facing the world today will have more detrimental impacts in our countries. They are reversing all the gains that our countries have been making with poverty eradication and broader investments to achieve the SDGs. And it should be recalled that before the onset of COVID-19 pandemic, some of the fastest growing economies in the world were African countries. But with this crisis that the world is facing today, therefore hunger and malnutrition are rising all over in our continent. The case for social protection is strong and proven. I think listening to Cynthia and listening to Valerie, one can clearly see why. It supports human capital development, social cohesion, and inclusive economic growth. As the example of COVID-19 has shown us, social protection cushions societies in times of crisis. It also contributes to households meeting their nutrition needs with associated positive impacts on health. Social protection is also important as a measure to advance gender equality and women's empowerment. We have seen the disproportionate impact of natural disasters on women and girls. And in his report, Our Common Agenda, the UN Secretary General reminds us that social protection system could also form the basis of peaceful societies. And we have all witnessed in various times the link between social unrest and people in want of the fulfillment of their basic needs. We have experienced it in South Africa. Our Common Agenda is realistic in that it concedes that it may not be possible for all countries to provide social protection to all those who need it, but at least it proposes a baseline that all countries should aspire to: access to healthcare for all, basic income security for children, and for those unable to work, and for the elderly persons. And South Africa can identify with these proposals as they are in line with what we're already implementing in our country. But for developing countries, and Africa in particular, there's a need for enhanced international support for them to be able to afford social protection systems. This includes the fulfillment of already agreed international commitments on finance and other means of implementation. Domestic resources to implement or expand social protection in Africa could include targeted taxation measures, but I think Cynthia has also gone into what else is possible. We also have to stop illicit financial flows in order for our countries to invest such resources on social protection. Debt relief in times of crisis is also critical to give our governments more fiscal space for redistribution of resources. The 2030 Agenda is an integrated set of commitments that are linked and interdependent in many ways. And the extension of social protection is therefore also a key to leaving no one behind. As I conclude, I wish to reiterate and just stress the following elements. We need to use the window afforded to us by COVID-19 to place social protection at the top of our agenda in our country. And within the fiscal limitations of our country, we need to consider a floor or a base for social protection measures, nationally defined by each country. And in many countries, and we are actually going through that ourselves in South Africa, the debate is on whether we should keep permanent the special social protection measures we introduced for COVID-19. But it goes without saying that our populations favor extension and permanence of these measures. And we also need to grapple with the fact that COVID-19 is not the last major crisis that the world will face. Increased investment in social protection, therefore, will also prepare our societies for future shock. Social protection is also important to address the different dimensions of malnutrition. I think that was elaborated on by Valerie. But by enhancing social inclusion, access to health, and education, we also promote better nutrition outcomes. Let me conclude by saying that we need to integrate a gender perspective into social protection. Women tend to be more vulnerable to malnutrition, and yet we know that when women are affected by malnutrition, this has a direct impact on children and future generation. I'd like to end by thanking OSA for this rich policy dialogue, and commit South Africa's commitment to supporting all of us as we pursue our Agenda 2063. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Joyini, for this very passionate plea for reframing the discussion in the context of the SDGs and reminding us of the important gender component, reiterating the fact that we can make a difference in this, especially if all partners keep their already agreed upon commitments. Thank you very, very much for these words, among other things that was said here. Let us now go to our next speaker, His Excellency Mr. Claver Gatete, Permanent Representative of Rwanda to the United Nations. Excellency, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, moderator. And I really want to thank Christine Duarte for really including me in this discussion, and also for choosing the topic on social protection, which in most cases is always forgotten. We want to say that at this point, when it comes to social protection, and I think Ambassador Matthew mentioned it very clearly, in rich countries, this is a priority, and it is done for all the poor and vulnerable population, part of the population. In our own African countries, where the resources are very scarce, it's always very difficult. And in this case, as you have seen, the current external shocks impacting Africa have unveiled the low level of food security on our continent. As you recall, it started in 2008, 2009, during the international financial crisis, and this was followed in 2010 on the energy crisis caused by what was termed as Arab Spring, and the most recent impact, of course, of COVID-19 and the war in Ukraine. All of them have had a very significant impact on food security, especially on our continent, affecting the most poor and the most vulnerable part of the population. In this context, the social protection must be part of the equation to address the issue of food security challenge that we are currently facing. In particular, the homegrown solutions to social protection are key to addressing this issue. In the case of Rwanda, such initiatives that have been taken include skills development, public works, to build skills and boost household incomes, income generating activities to promote off-farm activities, school feeding programs, and other subsidized schemes such as fertilizers and seeds to households with the ability to invest in farm activities and linkages with the market opportunities. This is to create some kind of sustainability and graduation from the poverty levels. Social protection is transformative in that it aims to improve the socio-economic status of the society through the promotion of positive values, respect of rights, and family and community-based support systems, access to labor market opportunities, and linking poor households or communities which are most prone to economic and life cycle shocks to socio-economic opportunities is of paramount importance as part of the mechanisms of empowering the communities toward self-resilience. 3 examples in the case of Rwanda to address the issue of social protection that we have had to implement include what we call the social program or welfare program. There is 1 cow per poor family program and a school feeding program. With the social program, with the means working together as people, they get together, government provides the resources, and then people work together for the improvement of the poor. So the social welfare program is a government Rwanda poverty reduction initiative, which provides communities with the skills and support necessary to engage in problem solving and decision making for their development. The program helps citizens to use local institutions to achieve goals set by the community. These include public works, such as the construction of the feeder roads in the rural areas, building the terraces, in our case, it's a mountainous country, building the terraces for agriculture production, and agriculture production for the poor, where people get together, resources are provided, and also creates employment for those who are strong enough to work, but didn't have the opportunity to get the employment. The approach puts emphasis on the graduation of families from extreme poverty, because when you are supported all the way until you graduate. This initiative we found is very cost effective and spreads resources to the most vulnerable communities across the social welfare categories. The second initiative, which started on a low scale, was the 1 cow per poor family project. Once you get the cow, the first produce is given to your neighbor and then to your neighbor, and it cuts across the whole country. And we find that this one has been extremely useful. So this program is referred to as the Girinka program, which was initiated to reduce poverty through direct production farming, improving livelihoods through increased milk product consumption and income generation, and improving agricultural productivity through the use of manure as fertilizer to increase agricultural productivity and increase incomes of the poor farmers. And this also has led to the introduction of what we call 1 cup of milk per child program, which was introduced by the Rwandan government as an implementation of the outcomes of the Integrated Development Program to prevent and reduce malnutrition among the school-going children. The last initiative is the school feeding program. The government of Rwanda has scaled up school feeding programs from pre-primary up to the secondary schools, equipping schools with kitchens and cooking stoves, and providing a subsidy for each student's meal to complement parents' contribution. The government subsidized 40% of the cost of the meal, and the rest is contributed by the parents. The Ministry of Education allocated capitation grant. This is a formula that we use where part of the money that is given to a school is contributed for the school feeding. So it's called capitation grants, which is under the basic education program to ensure that all Rwandan children are given an opportunity to attend school. In 2019, the implementation of these measures in secondary schools led to 680,000 students receiving government subsidy on school feeding. In 2020, the school feeding was scaled up to the entire education sector by subsidizing public and government-aided school with 3.3 million students, which resulted in an increase of almost close to 400%. These are the kind of initiatives that are going to help us in terms of not only helping the poor people, but also ensuring that there is sustainability and also the education, which in our case is free education from the government, is accessed by everyone, the rich, the poor, and the most vulnerable. And we believe that by creating some of these initiatives, which are long-term in nature, which are sustainable, can help in terms of addressing most of the effects of the food security issues that we see in our communities being addressed in a more sustainable manner. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Gatete, for these very practical examples of solutions that work in Rwanda and that are replicable and from which we should definitely learn. It is now time for us to open our interactive discussions. I would like to remind each speaker that we would need to be concise and deliver our interventions within 3 minutes. Please raise your hands or send questions through this chat. And as was said earlier, you do have access to translation. If you're having any difficulties with it, please do let us know. Let us start with our first pre-registered speaker, His Excellency Ambassador Nicolas de Rivière, Permanent Representative of France to the United Nations. Ambassador de Rivière, over to you, please.
Good morning, Gary. Good morning, everyone. I'll speak in French. Le nombre de personnes en situation d'insécurité alimentaire dans le monde a atteint des niveaux inégalés en ce premier semestre 2022. Les effets de la guerre d'invasion russe en Ukraine sur la sécurité alimentaire et nutritionnelle mondiale sont venus s'ajouter à une situation humanitaire déjà alarmante. Injustice supplémentaire, cela en Afrique plus qu'ailleurs et tout particulièrement parmi les populations les plus vulnérables. La situation est particulièrement préoccupante au Sahel, où jusqu'à 18 millions de personnes seront confrontées à une grave insécurité alimentaire au cours des 3 prochains mois. Mais je pense aussi aux populations touchées du sud de l'Éthiopie, au nord du Kenya, en passant par la Somalie, qui font face à une sécheresse alarmante. Le spectre de la famine et le risque de nouveaux foyers de crise en Afrique ne laissent pas la France indifférente. La France est convaincue qu'il est de la responsabilité de la communauté internationale de se montrer solidaire du continent africain. Les solutions pour résoudre le mal à la racine sont connues. Mettre un terme à tous les conflits, à commencer par celui qui s'est déclenché au mois de février en Ukraine. Donner accès à la vaccination contre la Covid aux populations africaines. Lutter contre le changement climatique avec des cibles nationales ambitieuses, tant sur le front de l'atténuation que de l'adaptation, avec des financements des bailleurs à la hauteur des promesses faites. Il faut donner un nouvel élan aux initiatives internationales en faveur du développement agricole durable et résilient des régions les plus exposées à l'insécurité alimentaire, ainsi que des populations les plus vulnérables, comme le projet emblématique de la Grande Muraille verte ou l'initiative sur les protéines végétales lancée lors du dernier sommet Union européenne-Union africaine de février dernier. Nous avons l'ambition d'identifier les projets de filières concrets que nous souhaiterons développer en ce sens avec l'appui du FIDA. Mais cela ne suffit pas ou plus. L'ampleur prise par la crise alimentaire ces dernières semaines exige en plus le lancement de nouvelles initiatives. Je salue à ce titre la mise en place par le secrétaire général des Nations Unies du groupe de réponse à la crise mondiale sur l'alimentation, l'énergie et les finances. C'est dans le même esprit que la France, dans sa capacité de présidence du Conseil de l'Union européenne, a lancé l'initiative FARM, F-A-R-M. Elle se compose de 3 piliers. Un pilier commercial pour apaiser les tensions sur les marchés agricoles. Il s'agit d'élaborer un plan d'urgence de libération des stocks en cas de crise pour éviter toute situation de pénurie et modérer les hausses de prix. Il s'agit aussi d'obtenir un engagement multilatéral à ne pas imposer de restrictions à l'exportation des matières premières agricoles. Il s'agit enfin de mettre en place un suivi transparent des obstacles au commerce des produits agricoles et des prix sur les marchés. Le second pilier de Farm, c'est un pilier de solidarité pour nous préparer dès cet été aux premiers effets de la guerre. Il s'agit de promouvoir l'action coordonnée des pays producteurs pour relever temporairement les seuils de production quand c'est possible et sans compromettre les objectifs de durabilité. Il s'agit aussi de mettre en place un mécanisme d'allocation des volumes additionnels pour garantir l'accès de tous en quantité suffisante et à prix raisonnable. Il y a un troisième pilier en faveur de la production dans les pays concernés qui vise à augmenter significativement les investissements dans la production alimentaire durable et à mettre l'accent sur le développement rural et la production agroalimentaire en Afrique. Le soutien de l'Union africaine sera bien sûr essentiel dans la mise en œuvre des résultats de Farm. Nous avons l'ambition d'y travailler rapidement en capitalisant sur la riche coopération entamée dans le cadre du dernier sommet Union européenne-Union africaine en lien avec nos partenaires internationaux, dont le Programme alimentaire mondial, dont je salue bien sûr la présence ce matin, mais aussi avec les initiatives pertinentes comme l'Alliance globale de la présidence allemande du G7. J'appelle donc pour conclure tous les acteurs publics et privés intéressés à rejoindre l'initiative Farm. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so very much, Ambassador de Olivier. We look forward to hearing much more about Farm in the next few weeks and months. Let us go now to our second pre-registered speaker, Dr. Jim Adesina, Professor and Chair in Social Policy at the University of South Africa. Professor Adesina, over to you.
Thank you very much, and my appreciation to Ms. Duarte and her team for the invitation to be part of this panel discussion. I think a starting point, and we've had that a lot of this from the excellencies who spoke before me, is a more expansive understanding and an approach to the idea of social protection. For the work that we do at my chair, we focus on social policy in terms of the interconnectedness of many dimensions of securing human well-being. And when it comes to the question of nutrition, an often neglected part, social protection instrument in international debates, international discussion, is what we call agrarian support, especially for smallholder farmers. First of all, we know it has the tendency to be prophylactic. In other words, we don't wait for vulnerability to emerge before we redress it, but a proactive, prevention of people falling into what they call a vulnerability. And we know that in at least in some of the evidence that we have, small lower level, local level research that we did, smallholder farmers in this kind of environment actually did better, under COVID, in terms of the securing, basics. And the idea it's not to think of social protection as something we do to get people to graduate out of it. It's about securing, it's about security for people around, throughout the life cycle. And I think, especially when it comes to the question of nutrition, gender equitable education, and we don't think of education as a social protection instrument. But we know that if we pay attention to the quality of education for the current generation and pay attention to the economy, life chances of the current generation is likely to be better than that of their parents, as some of people in my own generation. And that, better educated women, have, households with better nutritional outcome. And now I would like to comment the multifaceted dimensions of the way in which the government of Rwanda, for instance, responds to the question of protecting the well-being of his citizens in terms of social policy. But and I end on this note, one country that we don't talk too much about and for which we need to learn a lot is Mauritius. Mauritius, in a visionary leadership agenda setting, committed to an expansive social policy when it was a country at the level of $400 per capita. It's about 9,500, and in other words, this is not something you do when you become rich. It's something you do because of visionary agenda setting and leadership commitment to the well-being of the citizens. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Professor. I am conscious of our time, but I would like to give the opportunity to others to comment, provide feedback, ask questions. Already in the chat, I see some very impressive comments. So I'm looking for a show of hands of any of our participants who would like to say a few words. Remember, keeping it very focused and short. Meanwhile, and as we wait for at least one or two people to talk, one of the very interesting comments I saw and I would like to share with you is, we've been talking about this for years and years. Why is this new? What's going to be different? What's the new element in the discussions today? So I go back to our panelists with this question that came from the chat. We've been in these discussions. What's new today? What should we expect? More movement and more engagement today than in the past, and why is this not just talk? Over to any of the panelists that may want to react as we give another few minutes for anyone to raise their hands and also contribute to this exciting discussion.
Okay, moderator, while we're waiting for other comments, I'll just share some quick points as to what is new. One, what is new is the sense of urgency. And as the ambassador from South Africa said, COVID has been a major challenge, but it has provided us with an opportunity to see what can be done and what needs to be done. So that sense of urgency, that recognition that this is something that is not just a sectoral issue, but as also I think Professor Adesina mentioned, that social protection is a key driver of development. It's not welfare, it's not charity, it's much more dynamic. And it's also not something that will be dealt with by just one particular arm of government. So that's one of the things that will be new. Cooperation among the UN agencies and the development partners. No one agency can deal with this. For the third week, we're working with WFP, but on the ground, we're working also with WFP. We're also working with the international financial institutions. We're working with new players, recognizing that all hands have to be on deck for this to happen. So that will be different. The third one, and I'll stop there. The third one as to what is different is that Africa is now really sitting down to say, okay, we want to do this. What needs to change? What are the homegrown solutions that we can learn from? And what do we need to practically do to move the needle? Not just because we want to report on the SDGs, but because we see that there's a real danger that if Africans continue to be significantly excluded, if we continue to have the kind of inequalities that we have, the sustainability of even our countries, the security of our countries will be at jeopardy. So these are all parts of the solution that have been put together in the strategy. Someone asked the question as to data. We have challenges with data in Africa. That is one of the areas we're looking at. So what will be different? The result that we're going to do something together to move the needle. Secondly, that we know it can be done, it's going to be challenging. Third, it's not going to be business as usual, and we have to work together. I'll stop there. I'm sure my other panelists will have other dimensions to add.
Thank you very much. I think very well said. Any other panelists want to contribute to this key question of what's new?
Gary, allow me to jump while we wait for a raised hand. Let me raise my hand. First, to subscribe everything that has been said by Cynthia, Valerie, but my dear sister Matu and my dear brother Clever. Yes, indeed. To put social protection as a driver in terms of delivering inclusive development is no longer an option. It has become an imperative. We have no alternative. We have no alternative. Second, I would like to stress some of the issues that, one issue that has been raised here: social protection and peace and security. Believe me, we reach a stage where instability is increasing in Africa. We need to stop and ask ourselves why instability has been increasing more in the past 5 years. But if we look very well, much before, even when Africa was delivering economic growth, we need to ask why. We reach a stage that is no longer possible to deliver economic growth without income distribution. It's impossible. And when we talk about income distribution, we need to look at the low-hanging fruit in the tree. It's social protection. Let's go to peace and security third. If we, I mentioned this yesterday in the high-level policy dialogue, if we squeeze, we'll understand that the root cause of increasing instability in Africa, at the end of the day, is the absence of the state. A huge deficit in terms of providing social services, in terms of providing public goods. So we need, in the peace and security package, we need to include social protection. We need to, if our goal is to reestablish higher levels of stability, the nexus, peace, security, and development, it's crucial. And development is the supply of social services, particularly the social protection. I do believe that in the value chain, conflict prevention, peace making, peace building, and nation building, social protection should be considered a permanent element of this value chain, particularly school feeding. Back to you, Gary. Thank you.
Thank you so much, USG. I think very well said. Our technical team, some people are telling us on the chat they would like to participate. They've tried to raise their hands unsuccessfully. And we're seeing a lot of interesting comments, including, for example, what do we do because of the lack of data? I've heard our panelists really talk about, and this was important, the social protection not being a charity. USG just really made the link between peace, development, social security, nation building, the low-hanging fruit. It was mentioned several times here how we should use the opportunity of COVID to really recreate this policy of systematic social protection. We've heard some very innovative bottom-up approaches, including examples from Rwanda and others. We've heard a lot in terms of how important new initiatives are going to be, how partnership and comprehensive partnerships are going to be to this. We've received, I think, a lot of information from Cynthia about why this moment is a new moment and why we can capture the energies and the specific context to rethink how we approach the issue of social protection, and a lot more. So we're dealing with the time constraint here, and I want to be sensitive to that. USG Duarte, so I'll look to you for guidance on this. Can we take a few minutes because there's still a lot of comments that are coming up, or do we have to close? I will look to you, DSG.
I think we can take a few minutes because this subject is mobilizing people. Acknowledge that down the road, sub-team 4 will have an interpretation problem because unfortunately we have given only 2 hours of interpretation. Back to you, Gary.
One of the things I see coming out here is, of course, the issue of data. Do one of our panelists want to talk to the constraint of data and of just having people really registered and identifying best practices? How do we deal with the lack of data in Africa? Any one of our
sorry, yeah. Can I say this, that sometimes we create bogey features, and data is one of them. Some of the best advances that were made in Africa in the area of education, in the area of provision of health, didn't require precise data. When you look at the rollout of the universal primary education in Western Nigeria in the 50s, it was a hit and go, but you create, you have creative responses to issues as they emerge. It is about visionary agenda setting. It's about a leadership commitment to the well-being and welfare of its citizens. It is not about when you become rich. It is not about when you have all the infrastructure in place. It is about commitment. Now, we also need to be aware that social protection, as we understand it, has different meaning to different international organizations. There are people who push social protection essentially as safety net with really appalling level of adequacy, where you have a situation where money being paid out to people is less than the average cost of a loaf of bread in a day. It's not something to celebrate. So we need to have a more comprehensive and expansive understanding of what we mean. And in the work that we do, our preference is for social policy as an understanding of interlocking dimensions of activation of productive capacity of people, protection of people through the life cycle and against the vagaries of a market, social protection, productivity, in terms of the gender dimension of care economy and so on and so forth, and redistribution. We should not be afraid to raise the issue of redistribution, and we should not be afraid to raise the issue that this is about, first and foremost, about commitment to the well-being of people on our continent. Without that, it will be just, perfunctory, gesticulation, to international, norms, and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. This question in the chat that I find quite interesting, and possibly to Ambassador Joini or maybe Ambassador Gatete, is political stability a precondition for effective social protection programs?
Thank you. If I may, is political stability a precondition? I don't think so. And in fact, I think you need to be looking at social protection even during times of conflict. The more so you need to do that. And I think we heard from USG there where he was talking about that nexus of peace, of development, and peace and security in general. I would argue that the more you mainstream social protection into the processes of peace building, into the processes of post-conflict reconstruction and development. So we are talking about fragile states here. It is even more needed in those contexts. So it is not just for, you do not have to have a stable society or a stable country to do that. The more you need social protection in post-conflict, in fragile states, and even during times of conflict.
Thank you so much for that thought. Any other reflections on this?
Gary, I would say just the opposite. Social protection is a precondition for political stability. Thank you.
Very important point, and thank you. Thank you so much. Colleagues, we've exceeded our time. This has been a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much to all the panelists. Thank you to all that have participated. Let me hand it over back to the USG for her final words. It was a pleasure being part of this, and really have a great rest of your day. Over back to you, USG.
Thank you, Gary, for such outstanding moderation. Thank you very much. I would like to thank all the speakers, my dear sisters, Valerie, Cynthia, and Matu. Thank you, Matu. My dear brother, Katete from Rwanda. Rwanda is becoming with a strong political will from President Kagame, is becoming a champion in terms of school feeding in Africa. Rwanda set up very high levels in terms of delivering school feeding as the most effective tool to bring to reach a high level of coverage from a social protection. And thank you, Professor Adesina. It has been a pleasure to work with you in this Africa dialogue series. African voices from the academic world are needed in this debate, for sure. Thank you very much. And I do believe that in this stage, Gary, we can go to sub-team 4, I believe, correct?
Yes, we can.
Yes, and allow me, thank you again. So we move to sub-team 4. Before giving the floor to the moderator, my dear colleague Bitsat, I would like just to thank everybody, the ambassadors that agree to be here with us for sub-team 4. I'm referring to the ambassador from Mozambique, as well, my dear brother Pedro Comissário, as well as my dear brother ambassador of Senegal, my dear brother Sheikh. I would like also to thank ECA. My dear sister Vera could not be here with us for this sub-team 4, but she's very well, I would say, represented by the deputy director. As per our program, I would like to give the floor to the moderator, correct? So the moderator can introduce us and then lead the session. Back to you, Bitsat.
Thank you very much, USG. It's very exciting to be part of this discussion. So this session is on human capital development, climate, energy, and food systems. The session would be structured in 3 parts, where we're going to have keynote speakers for the first session. For the first segment, we're going to have Ms. Grace Obat, Director of Private Sector Development and Finance at ECA. We're going to have our Undersecretary General and Special Advisor on Africa, Ms. Cristina Duarte. And then second segment, we're going to have our esteemed African permanent representatives who give us perspectives from their country's point of view on the topic. For this, we have His Excellency Pedro Comissário Afonso, permanent representative of Mozambique to the United Nations. And then we also have His Excellency Mr. Sheikh Nayang, permanent representative of Senegal to the United Nations. And then the third segment, we're going to have an interactive discussion. Just some housekeeping items, I would like to note that we have pre-registered participants for the interactive session, and they will be invited to take the floor. However, I would really appreciate if other participants who wish to engage with the speakers, if you could please put your questions in the chat. I'll make sure to introduce your questions to the panel. We have time limits, so I would like to humbly request our speakers to please limit your interventions to less than 5 minutes, so that we can take on more questions and really listen to our participants who are joining us online. Finally, I would like to note that we do have interpretation in French, Portuguese, and Arabic, and I really do look forward to an engaging session. So with that, if I may, Ms. Grace Obat, if you could please take the floor to deliver your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Distinguished partners, colleagues, and participants, good morning. Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I think we have a mic open that we're having an echo. I think we have, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Vera Songwe couldn't be here. She asked me to give some remarks at this meeting. And I'd like to recognize the partnership we have with the African Union Commission. And definitely
I'm very sorry, Ms. Obat. I think the echo is coming from you. Maybe you have your speaker open and as well as your mic. If you can mute your speaker and then speak through the mic, I apologize.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Is it better? Is it better?
No.
No. If you mute your speaker on your device, I think it would.
Is that better? Is that better?
Unfortunately, no.
Can you hear me now? Hear me now?
No, we can't hear you, but there is an echo because I believe I think your speaker is on. So your speaker would have to be muted and only your mic would have to work.
Okay.
The speaker in the computer, the speaker in the laptop.
Correct. Now I think the mic is muted. May I please ask our technical folks to guide?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am, but you were we're hearing an echo constantly. Can you just log out and log back in?
All right. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, or maybe there are two devices. In the meantime, USG, may I please call on you?
Yes, no problem. I'm ready. Bitsat. Okay, thank you.
Switched off the other gadget. Is it better?
No, it's still the same.
Okay, I'll log out and log in again.
Thank you.
Can I go ahead, Bitsat?
Please, yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bitsat. So I will take the opportunity of Subteam 4 and bring some key issues that OSA has been amplifying in terms of helping building a new narrative around climate and energy from an African perspective. And I had the opportunity to deliver these same ideas in the couple of past weeks in different events. So I wouldn't like to miss the opportunity of today. So if we assess best practice of countries promoting economic transformation, we go to developed countries, we go to emerging countries in Asia, even in Latin America. So economic transformation, promoting economic transformation, ensuring food security, digitalizing education, revolutionizing health systems, building manufacturing and industrialization capacities, or sustaining peace by creating quality jobs and delivering services. We all in this virtual conversation will realize that no country in the world has achieved these ambitions without abundant and affordable access to energy. No one. So in this regard, energy can be considered a foundational building block to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and unlock the future of Africa that is clear, explained in the Agenda 2063. So against this background, as the world starts reopening for business and preparing the post-COVID-19 scenario, I do believe that it's fundamental to focus on bridging the energy gap in Africa and to ensure, of course, the delivery of the two agendas. So even though Africa is home to 17% of the world's population, the continent presents only 3.3% of global primary energy consumption, only 1.1% of electricity generation, and only 3% of global energy use in industry. So basically, this means that African countries have a very long way to go in electrifying homes, supplying sustained and reliable energy for food systems value chains. So in this context, the key to success in this common endeavor lies on how policy making addresses the compound challenges of climate change, energy mix, and food systems. Regarding climate change, although the African continent, as everybody knows in this virtual conversation, is responsible for only 3.8% of global greenhouse emissions, of course, is the most affected region in the world. So African countries currently, as a result of what I just said, spend between 2 and 9% of their GDP in climate adaptation, in a situation that they do not have fiscal space to address COVID-19 disruptions and now Ukrainian war disruptions. So, and in terms of projections, we all know today that GDP exposure in African nations vulnerable to extreme climate partners is projected to grow from 895 billion in 2018 to about 1.4 trillion in 2023. So Africa contributes only with 3.8%, is the most affected region. As we speak, Africa is already spending in terms of climate adaptation between 2 and 9% in a no fiscal space or in the absence of fiscal space. And if we project GDP exposure, will reach 1.4 trillion in 2023. So next year. So, but at the same time, let's flip the coin. The global policies and timelines designed to limit greenhouse gas emissions, that they do not take the continent's unique and nuanced circumstances into account, threaten to limit Africa's capacity to grow. So we face a situation that the global narrative around climate and energy threatens to limit Africa's capacity to grow, creating an impossible trade-off between African countries' right to energy access and the compliance with climate change commitments. So in this context, also has been advocated that transition or just transition in Africa must be understood above all as technological transition. So it does not make sense, even essentially from a food system standpoint, to discuss energy transition in Africa without discussing how it is going to impact energy access problems. So the approach should lead to the understanding that only with increased access to energy, climate adaptation investments will lead to value for money, particularly in the food systems value chain. Thank you. Back to you, Bitsat.
Thank you, USG. I believe we have Ms. Obat back, and we have resolved the technical issues. So, Ms. Obat, if I may invite you.
Yes, I am. I hope that the echo is now gone.
Perfect.
Thank you. Okay, so I listened to what Ms. Christina summarized, and she highlighted some of the challenges that I would have highlighted in the opening. And just to summarize, we recognize that Africa is coming out of a very challenging time with the lingering effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, and then the renewed supply chain disruptions as a result of the Ukraine and Russia conflict, and the weak productive capacity and resilience of production systems definitely then made worse by the socioeconomic stress levels that I think the previous speaker has highlighted. And as a result, this has, of course, increased vulnerabilities that many speakers have talked about: newly poor at 55 million, another 39 million pushed into extreme poverty, and increase in undernourished at about 22%. So we recognize that over and above trying to recover from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, Africa needs to plan to build resilience for potential future threats, which range from macroeconomic disturbances, disease, conflict, rising food and energy prices, and of course the tightening financial conditions, and not to mention the effects of climate change, which the previous speaker has highlighted in great detail. Indeed, recently we witnessed extreme weather events on the continent. So allow me to highlight then that a big challenge that the continent is facing is then the need for incremental financing to invest in sustainable development. It is estimated that we will need between 130 billion to 170 billion annually for infrastructure development, 65 billion for health, 39 billion for education, and a significant amount, I think 3 trillion for climate mitigation adaptation by 2030. Over the course of this dialogue series, various contributors have made recommendations on what needs to be done then to improve the resilience of the continent with specific focus to human capital, climate, energy, and food systems. At this point, I would like to highlight some of the interventions that ECA is undertaking to address these areas. Since I have highlighted the significant need for financing, I can start with the areas of finance. We recognize that the financing needs of the continent have been met through means that going forward may not be adequate on their own to finance our development needs and recovery needs. Hence, the need to focus on finding innovative financing approaches. Last year, on the sidelines of COP26 in Glasgow, ECA launched the Liquidity and Sustainability Facility, which is supposed to reduce borrowing costs for African governments. Indeed, the high cost of credit has been a significant issue, and the increasing cost of financing continues to be a challenge that African governments deal with every day. The Liquidity and Sustainability Facility aims to improve terms of subsequent issuance of bonds and to improve liquidity in the market as investors get favorable terms when using bonds as collateral for repo transactions. Over and above that, we also recognize that there is need to identify alternatives for financing for climate change. So green and blue bonds is an area that we're exploring. And last year, ECA supported the issuance of a 3 billion Rand green bond by the Development Bank of Southern Africa in partnership with PINCO for investment in renewable energy generation in order to support progress towards SDG 7. Similarly, ECA has established initiatives around developing capital markets in Africa so that private sector investment in the areas of energy, agriculture, infrastructure can increase as private investors access capital in the domestic market and work towards reduced cost of financing and the impact of foreign exchange fluctuations. In the area of increasing productivity, ECA is working with member states to promote regional trade, and the African Free Continental Trade Agreement is one such area that is looking to enhance trade between the nations. And ECA has provided technical assistance to member states to develop strategies for its implementation on the continent. To boost trade, the use of technology has also been implemented. This month, ECA launched in collaboration with Afrexim Bank and the AFCFTA Secretariat, the Africa Trade Exchange Platform, which is a digital platform that is aimed at enhancing the digital ecosystem for e-commerce, provide easy market access for small businesses, both in the agribusiness and other areas, to increase productivity on the continent and create the much needed jobs that we believe private sector needs to contribute to. Also in the area of technology and e-commerce, ECA partnered with the Electronic World Trade Program platform to provide access to markets for small businesses and agri-producers, and introducing various brands into the Asian markets through that initiative. In order to enhance further job creation and productivity in agriculture, ECA and Afreximbank has signed an MOU with DRC and Zambia to enhance production of manufacturing electronic car batteries, as well as develop regional value chains for agriculture and agro-park development in Zambia and Zimbabwe. Similarly, we recognize the need to provide access to lands and land rights for particularly women and youth, who are the big population of people employed in agriculture. And ECA, in partnership with AUC and AFDB, in the auspices of the Africa Land Policy Center, has developed guidelines for large-scale land-based investments to support member states to attract further investments from the private sector in agriculture and related fields. In order to ensure coordinated or integrated investment and boosting regional trade, ECA has invested in understanding the requirements for infrastructure investments for the continent that would promote regional trade. To this end, ECA has identified investment opportunities and is seeking private sector engagement around transport, because with the implementation of the CFTA, it is envisaged that the demand for various forms of transport from road to rail and maritime will go up. And ECA is working towards identifying partnerships that can promote this nature of investment. In the area of climate, this year, the COP27 is happening in Africa. ECA is working in partnership with AUC to develop a roadmap to COP27, where member states can develop a position that ensures by the end of COP27, Africa gets clear direction on the energy transition, which the previous speaker has spoken about, as well as identifying practical financing solutions to support Africa in the climate change, addressing the climate change challenges. At the same time, there's been a recommendation that we should foster an enabling environment for the implementation of climate resilient practices. And in order to de-risk investment in climate smart agriculture and renewable energy, ECA, through its Africa Center for Statistics and its Geospatial Information Systems team in the Technology and Climate Change team, we are supporting member states to increase digitization of data collection processes to ensure that there's accurate data on climate, market information, investment opportunities, and that these can be used to make evidence-based decision-making by member states towards climate smart agriculture and renewable energy investments. It seems that the challenges of the continent are daunting, and we recognize that they are, but we believe that if we continue working in partnership with the various partners represented on this dialogue series, as well as others not represented here, we can bring back Africa to inclusive growth and sustainable development. I thank you for your attention, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Ms. Obat, and it's really encouraging to hear all that frontiers that ECA is engaging in. If I may invite our next speaker, we are in the second segment where we're going to hear from African permanent representatives. With that, if I may ask His Excellency Mr. Pedro Comissário Afonso, permanent representative of Mozambique, to take the floor. Excellency.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, Your Excellency, Ms. Cristina Duarte, and Secretary General and Special Advisor for Africa, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It is our belief in Mozambique, and indeed in Africa at large, that food security and climate change are two major development challenges of our time. On the African continent, the food system is off track, And the climate is changing profoundly, as you can witness with the events in Mozambique. In 2020, more than 1 in 5 people in Africa faced hunger, more than double the proportion of hungry people in any other region. And about 282 million of Africa's population are undernourished. Adapting Africa's food system to climate change is an imperative, not a choice. Food security declines by 5 to 20% with each flood or drought, while the region experiences a 1.4 reduction in food calories per year from key food security crops. At the same time, while agricultural exports are rising, the continent remains a net food importer at an annual cost of $43 billion. Without urgent and decisive action, the continent's food import bill is likely to top 110 billion by 2025. Climate change is already stalling progress by interacting with multiple other stresses and shocks, including inequality, degrading natural resources, conflicts, the COVID-19 pandemic, and most recently, as we know, with the crisis in Ukraine. The external shocks have exposed the fragility of health and food systems across the world, particularly in Africa. Climate change impacts such as increasing temperatures, desertification, droughts, frequent and intense extreme weather events, rising sea levels create challenges such as volatility in food access and prices, increased competition for natural resources such as land and water, and these trigger climate forced mobility, if not outright conflicts. Current actions to build the resilience to climate change and related shocks across Africa food systems are promising, but not nearly enough to meet the scale of the problem. If global temperatures rise by an average of 3 degrees centigrade trajectory, as current trend suggests, disruption of current food systems will be profound and catastrophic for millions who will struggle to survive. Even on a 1.5 degrees centigrade trajectory, a more ambitious and urgent set of adaptation interventions are required to prevent wide-scale famine. Africa's food systems are in the throes of a crisis climate. From devastating droughts in Southern Africa and West Africa to cyclones and flooding in East Africa and West Africa. The extreme weather is threatening crops and livestock and putting millions of Africans at risk for food insecurity. We urgently need to adapt Africa's agriculture and food system to climate change, and we need to act now. To tackle the disruption of Africa's food system requires human capital development. And more African countries are realizing that developing and promoting adoption of climate smart technologies, implementing the right enabling policies, and developing relevant skills in Africa's food system workforce are among the game changers that can truly make a difference. Getting it right with these fundamentals can help lay the foundation of a food system that can better feed and sustain Africa. Agriculture transformation will need dedicated people with the right knowledge and skills. Only 2% of Africa's students specialize in agriculture, even though agriculture contributes 32% of Africa's GDP. Despite low enrollment in agricultural programs, demand and opportunity continue to be high in the food system, and this upward trend of high demand and great opportunity looks to continue into the future. After all, farming alone accounts for 60% of total employment in sub-Saharan Africa. When you take jobs into account, the food system as a whole, the number of jobs is much higher. Moreover, in some African countries, the food system is projected to add more jobs than the rest of the economy until 2025. Thus, Africa needs more homegrown food producers, food processors, food system entrepreneurs, agronomists, agricultural scientists. We need all this. Countries need to invest more in supporting the development of a skill base that can rise up to meet the magnitude of Africa's food system challenges and needs. Expanding access to clean and affordable energy is an imperative in transformation of the food system towards resilient, viable, and inclusive systems. Africa will need to critically examine policies to incentivize off-grid and mini-grid solutions to meet energy needs of farmers, agri-industries, and households in remote areas. Expanding access to alternative energy sources such as solar, wind, and biogas can help boost Africa's security in Africa by accelerating sustainable agricultural development, improving water security, and people-centered economic growth. In this context, energy access to facilitate adaptation by supporting socioeconomic development or enabling specific strategies such as water pump for irrigations, biogas digesters, providing organic fertilizer, and clean cooking solutions to reduce firewood use, protecting forest-based adaptation services is crucial to bridge food systems and climate adaptation. Africa is realizing that energy planning to define the energy mix Africa needs from climate adaptation, industrialization, consumption to food systems will shape our future on energy. It is critical to strengthen climate resilient agriculture through investments in productivity, enhancing technologies and practices, including improved seeds, feeds, and animal breeds adapted to changing climate and appropriate storage and post-harvest management provisions and capabilities. It is also important to foster climate smart and biodiversity ecosystems, resilient practice across the entire agro and food systems in order for the situation in Africa to get better. And I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. If I may invite our next speaker, His Excellency, Mr. Sheikh Nang, Permanent Representative of Senegal. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la modératrice. As you see, I'm going to speak in French.
Bien sûr, ça va.
Je voudrais donc, à l'entame de mon propos, remercier et féliciter une nouvelle fois ma sœur Christina, ainsi que sa brillante équipe pour les efforts continus et inlassables au service de l'Afrique. Je me réjouis aussi de la qualité des débats qui ont rythmé ce cycle de conférence. Je pense qu'à la dernière intervention de mon frère et ami Pedro, qui a fait un exposé extrêmement brillant, et une illustration de la qualité des débats qu'on a. Et je voudrais ici d'ores et déjà dire que je partage entièrement la problématique qui a été exposée par Pedro, mais aussi les pistes de solutions qui ont été proposées. Donc, mon intervention sera une sorte de complément aux idées pertinentes qu'il a eu à avancer. Mais laissez-moi aussi dire combien aussi j'ai apprécié la présentation liminaire de Christina, qui, comme à son habitude, a cette faculté de poser les problèmes avec beaucoup de pertinence, avec des mots très simples. Et je voudrais encore une fois la remercier. Et je voudrais aussi saluer la sortie de notre sœur Grace Obat pour sa présentation. Alors, je vais aborder la thématique qui nous a été soumise d'abord sous l'angle des grands défis qui interpellent le continent africain. En français, on dit qu'un problème bien posé est à moitié résolu. Il est important de savoir comment envisager des solutions, de voir la réalité en face. Or, quelles sont les réalités auxquelles nous faisons? Première réalité, l'Afrique et sa masse. L'Afrique qui compte 1,3 milliard d'habitants. La plus forte évolution démographique du monde est attendue en Afrique. Des projections estiment que la population de l'Afrique subsaharienne pourrait doubler d'ici 2050. Voilà un véritable défi lié aux dividendes démographiques. Autre réalité en Afrique, 490 millions de personnes vivent sous le seuil de pauvreté, selon l'ACNUS. En 2021, à l'exception du Cap-Vert, qui est le pays d'origine de ma chère sœur Christina, aucun pays d'Afrique subsaharienne n'était en voie, l'année dernière, n'était en voie d'éliminer l'extrême pauvreté d'ici 2030, même si les Seychelles et Maurice avaient déjà atteint cet objectif. 257 millions de personnes souffrent de la faim actuellement, dont 237 millions vivent en Afrique subsaharienne selon l'AFO. La sécheresse aussi menace 20 millions de personnes de famine rien que dans la corne de l'Afrique, selon le PAM. Et voyez tout ça dans le contexte de crise qui a été créé par la guerre en Ukraine. Il est établi que le continent importe plus de la moitié de ses besoins alimentaires, soit 35 milliards de dollars américains par an, selon la BAC. Et si la tendance n'est pas inversée, ce chiffre va monter à 110 milliards de dollars par an à l'horizon 2050. Autre défi, et je pense que Christina en a parlé aussi, c'est l'énergie. L'énergie reste un défi majeur. 600 millions de personnes n'ont pas accès à l'électricité. C'est un retard qui est énorme pour le développement du continent, notamment pour la transformation de son économie, l'éducation, la santé, l'agriculture, la sécurité alimentaire et l'industrie. Autre chose aussi, un phénomène qui est un phénomène mondial, c'est les effets des changements climatiques qui sont pernicieux et qui menacent la vie de millions de personnes. Pourtant, le continent ne contribue que 2 à 3% aux émissions mondiales. Et les changements climatiques ont ainsi réduit de 34% la croissance de sa production agricole. Je vais seulement donner une estimation, une indication du GIEC dans son dernier rapport, qui attire une fois de plus notre attention sur l'urgence d'agir afin de limiter les impacts négatifs considérables sur la biodiversité, l'agriculture, le système alimentaire, l'économie, la santé et tous les secteurs d'activité. En Afrique, finalement, donc pour un peu être dans le factuel, l'indice du capital humain de la Banque mondiale est de 0,4%, contre une moyenne mondiale de 0,57, classant l'Afrique au dernier rang. Ce qui signifie que les problèmes qui sont liés à l'éducation, à la santé, la nutrition, la population, la protection sociale et l'emploi persistent. Donc, des solutions doivent être identifiées et appliquées. C'est ça le constat que nous avons. Qui est un tableau qui est peu réduisant pour un continent doté d'un potentiel économique remarquable, mais qui reste le moins développé. Une situation due en grande partie à l'insuffisance de son capital humain, d'où la pertinence de notre système. Insuffisance de capital humain qui est seule à mesure de transformer ce potentiel en développement social et économique. Alors, les questions que nous devons nous poser sont nombreuses. Pourquoi l'Afrique est en retard alors qu'elle devrait être développée? Pourquoi l'Afrique devrait toujours recevoir de l'aide alimentaire alors qu'elle concentre 50% des terres arabes et abrite l'une des populations les plus jeunes et les plus dynamiques? Rappelons qu'en Afrique, la jeunesse constitue 75% de la population. Et pourquoi, avec tous ces atouts, pourquoi la moitié de la population africaine vit dans l'obscurité alors que le potentiel énergétique est énorme? Alors, d'autres questions aussi peuvent être posées. Comment le développement du capital humain peut contribuer à relever les défis liés au climat, au système alimentaire et à l'énergie? Quelle capacité transformationnelle de l'économie africaine peut être liée au capital humain? Personnellement, je n'ai pas la réponse à toutes ces questions. Voilà pourquoi on est ici à réfléchir ensemble. Mais il me paraît important d'indiquer quelques pistes qui peuvent aider à relever les défis que j'ai déjà cités. Et là, j'ai identifié 4 pistes. Premièrement, il convient d'augmenter considérablement les dépenses en capital humain. Je dis bien les dépenses en capital humain. Les investissements dans l'éducation, la santé et les infrastructures peuvent, sur le moyen ou long terme, améliorer la compétitivité et la productivité de l'Afrique. Le continent actuellement a besoin de plus de 4 millions d'ingénieurs et de 1,6 million de scientifiques et de chercheurs agricoles pour combler le gap en compétences. Parce qu'il y a un gap en compétences qui est réel. Quand on n'a pas l'expertise qu'il faut au niveau le plus élevé, il ne faut pas s'attendre à ce niveau. Il est donc nécessaire d'adapter les systèmes éducatifs nationaux, qui sont souvent extravertis. Il est nécessaire de créer des compétences en sciences, en technologie, en ingénierie et en mathématiques, ce qu'on appelle STEM, pour soutenir le développement industriel et répondre aux exigences du monde. Les services de nutrition et de soins de santé primaires de qualité doivent aussi être assurés pour éliminer la mortalité. Et récemment, la COVID-19 a révélé la faiblesse de nos plateaux techniques et nos systèmes sanitaires en général, ce qui veut dire qu'il nous faut repenser notre système de santé et faire en sorte que nous ayons des moyens de gérer toutes les prestations liées à ce secteur de façon beaucoup plus maîtrisée et de façon beaucoup moins dépendante de l'extérieur. À cet égard, les interventions de santé publique doivent rester une priorité, ainsi que les investissements dans la production pharmaceutique pour réduire la dépendance de l'Afrique à l'égard des médicaments importés. C'est ce qu'on appelle la souveraineté pharmaceutique et la souveraineté médicale. La deuxième piste, c'est qu'il nous faut miser sur les sciences, la technologie et l'innovation. À ce sujet, les pays africains doivent respecter leur engagement. Parce qu'il y a un engagement de consacrer au moins 1% de leur PIB à la recherche scientifique, technologique et d'innovation. Combien de pays africains le font? C'est vraiment là une question qu'il nous faut. Donc c'est, à mon avis, la recherche-développement qui aidera à apporter des solutions innovantes et des recherches sur l'agriculture intelligente ou sur l'exploitation des énergies renouvelables doivent être encouragées. L'Afrique devrait par ailleurs miser sur l'agriculture numérique et de précision, les systèmes perfectionnés d'alerte rapide, les technologies de télédétection et les approches neutres optimisées. L'agriculture de précision permet par exemple d'utiliser l'eau plus efficacement et mieux gérer les éléments fertiles. Elle doit aussi penser à relocaliser sa production agricole et à diversifier ce système alimentaire pour consommer ce qu'elle produit et produire ce qu'elle consomme. La troisième piste, c'est qu'il nous faut davantage promouvoir la zone de libre-échange continentale africaine. Nos leaders ont eu la très grande idée de mettre en place, de lancer une initiative qui est porteuse. Mais entre lancer une initiative et la mettre en œuvre, il y a une distance. Je pense qu'il est important d'accentuer la cadence, de faire en sorte que cette idée puisse se réaliser. De manière à ce que les échanges intra-africains puissent développer aussi les systèmes alimentaires, puissent développer l'industrie pharmaceutique et l'économie interdépendante de tous les pays. Le quatrième et le dernier point, et là je serai bref, c'est qu'il nous faut aussi trouver des financements adéquats pour lutter contre les changements climatiques et accéder à l'énergie. Et à cet égard, la question de la dette multilatérale et bilatérale doit être sérieusement traitée pour l'Afrique. C'est un fardeau pour nos économies fragiles et c'est une approche aussi qui aura une incidence directe sur la formation et sur le capital humain, d'où l'importance à élever cette question-là à un niveau de priorité absolue. En conclusion, cher USG Duarte, chers collègues, Madame la modératrice, je voudrais ici réitérer l'engagement de mon pays, le Sénégal, à faire le plaidoyer partout où l'occasion lui sera offerte, afin que ces questions qui nous intéressent soient tous abordées, et abordées de façon responsable, mais aussi de façon positive et de façon concrète. Et c'est ce que déjà fait le président Macky Sall, comme vous le savez, en sa qualité de président de l'Union africaine, mais également en tant qu'un des champions du groupe de réponse à la crise mondiale sur l'alimentation, l'énergie et les finances, le GRCM, qui a été lancé récemment par le secrétaire général de l'ONU. Comme vous le savez, ce groupe propose des solutions et je pense que si elles sont appliquées, nous pourrons créer un déclic pour faire face à ces défis. Encore une fois, tout cela ne sera possible que s'il y a l'engagement de tous les partenaires, des pays, des institutions multilatérales, publiques et privées, sociétés civiles, institutions de financement. C'est un effort global que nous pouvons mener pour répondre vraiment à ces défis et faire en sorte que l'Afrique se libère enfin avec tout le potentiel qu'elle a. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup, Excellence. If I may, we're going to our interactive session. We have 3 pre-registered speakers. Time is unfortunately getting short, so I see questions on the chat. I'll try to present them to our panelists, time permitting. But in the meantime, may I please invite Your Excellency, Ms. Ana Paula Zacarias, Permanent Representative of Portugal to the United Nations. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Ioannis, and allow me to start by congratulating the Office of the Special Advisor for Africa, dear Christina. Thank you for organizing and convening this high-level political dialogue, as well. Big thank to the briefers and also to my African colleagues. Un plaisir de vous écouter et d'apprendre avec vous. Merci. As the African Union themes for 22 recognizes, improving the situation regarding nutrition and food security is an objective closely interlinked with other policy areas. Food, agro-food systems, education, health, social protection, the promotion of renewable energies, and the efforts to address climate change all must be pursued together so that we can fully benefit from their mutual reinforcing potential. Unfortunately, the Russia aggression on Ukraine has had a negative impact on global development and our ability to deliver. And it brought additional stress and heavy shockwaves on food security and energy transitioning, widening the gap of inequalities and poverty across the African continent. So this affects all of us. And if we are going to push through, we must work together. In the short term, we could focus on the recommendations of the SG Global Crisis Response Group, ensuring access to food supplies and fertilizers, supporting vulnerable groups, delivering humanitarian food assistance, adopting sound policy responses based on local needs, on national priorities, and evolving market conditions, and providing access to finance that is much needed. We need a strong multilateral response coordinated by the United Nations and involving all the stakeholders, including IFIs, multilateral development banks, and the private sector. In the long term, further action, it is also necessary to interlink this integrated approach on food systems, access to energy, and climate action, where I would put also ocean action and water management that are so relevant. We have to ensure proper follow-up of the United Nations Food Systems Summit, while bearing in mind Africa's own effort, such as the Africa Common Position on Food Systems. We can also build upon the outcomes of last year's high-level dialogue on energy. And as the Honorable Ambassador of Mozambique referred, it is important to strengthen agricultural skills, education, research, but we need to do this taking into account local knowledge and supporting local projects, particularly the initiatives that are dealing with women and youth. We need to boost regional value chains, an objective to which the Africa Continent Free Trade Area can bring a critical contribution, as the Honorable Ambassador of Senegal mentioned. So these interconnected areas are elements that we try to bring about, and they are priorities of the Portuguese development cooperation in Africa. And we do so bilaterally, but also as a member of the European Union and in partnership with other countries, including through triangular cooperation projects. And we will continue to do so with our partners while ensuring their ownership to address their own development needs. So we firmly believe that only by working together, we can turn this crisis around and transform it into an opportunity to unlock Africa's development potential, which stands to benefit everyone in the world. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. If I may invite our next pre-registered speaker, Mr. Lukman Akintola. He's a member of the climate change team of the Migration, Youth and Children's Platform and Program Associate on Climate Security at the Frederick Edward Stifford in Nigeria's office. Sir?
Thank you for having me, distinguished speakers and Your Excellencies. Thank you so much for giving me the platform. So this conversation largely talks, we have been focusing on the nexus among human capital development, climate change, and more importantly, food security. And there are instances around us based on the work that our agencies do. We see that climate change is extremely driving a whole lot of human security challenges in the continent. And of course, this is not actually specific to Africa alone, but in this context, is doing a whole lot in driving human security challenges. And a big part of these human security challenges is food security. And as we know that food security, most of this conversation, especially in the continent, we can see is around even armed conflict. So a good example here in Nigeria, for instance, we have seen a whole lot of armed conflict that is coming from the shrinking of the Lake Chad. Just a report said that the Lake Chad, for instance, has shrunk about 90% for the past 50 years. So what that actually means is that with climate change driving the shrinkage of this lake, it has actually affected a lot of people's jobs, people that they depend on fishing. So, and this is a source of food security for the entire region. So this is a major issue. So it shows that the conversation on this nexus we are trying to address will not be complete without looking at how it is affecting on the ground. And of course, our distinguished speakers have made allusion to a whole lot of some of these issues. But one thing I would also like to stress is that food security, agriculture in that sense, for instance, statistics shows that food security for agriculture has about 30% of water usage in the continent, and this shows that to a large extent, one way or the other, it is very, very important. It is important because water, for water, for instance, shows that these are things that leads to shrinkage. So climate change, in the sense, shrink about land resources and water resources. And by having some of these shrinkages, it deeply affects food insecurity. And in view of all this, we also look at what energy has to do, because in order to have agriculture, we need energy. In order to transport freight from logistics, supply chain, energy has a whole lot to do. So this means that our conversation is very important here today, and we need to, and in the continent, a whole lot of oil conversation in terms of renewable energy is not even in the interplay yet. Most African countries are still very backward in terms of renewable energies. So they still use most of the non-renewable energy. And how can we ensure that we can protect our climate? How can we protect the Mother Earth if we really want to actually promote food security? So from our own perspective, what we have been doing is to foster knowledge capacity building. Most of our policymakers, there will be little or no political will if they don't even understand this interplay. So most of them just believe that with climate change, with having energy, they believe that largely it is for the economy to actually make sales, but they pay less attention to the issue of climate change and how it is affecting food insecurity and food security in the continent. So political capacity building for our policymakers is extremely important. As we talk about figures, statistics, we need as much as possible to actually train our policymakers, both people at the federal level and people at the legislative level in terms of lawmaking. So this is very, very important. And when we move away from this, we need to also ensure that we keep driving political will, because we will not develop effective mitigation strategies or adaptation strategies if we don't have the right political will. And this exactly is what is lacking in some of our African countries. So we have seen that while they actually put policies in place, there is less implementation. So, and what is the essence of policy that we have in place that we don't implement? And we can't even have a good grasp of some of these things if some of these frontline communities are not involved. So there is need for inclusion in our policy strategies, in our conversation. And when we look at it, most people that actually have this conversation, of course, knowledge base is extremely important. As I said earlier, capacity building, but inclusion, where they get to share their experience and also bring together the youth constituents to have some of these conversations. So inclusion is extremely important. It's not just basically at the level of intergovernmental organizations or basically at the big political level, but we need to bring frontline communities, the youth groups that can drive advocacy, and of course put policies into actions. So these are some of the things I would just want to add to this conversation. I think that we can have energy, but more importantly, green energy, renewable energy that could stand the test of time, and more importantly, we can also have food security if we are able to tackle the endemic challenges of climate change in the continent. So this is basically what I basically want to add. And largely in our own hand as the youth constituents, we are actually driving this conversation. Even as we move towards to COP27, we are seeing how we can actually come together to actually drive the conversation on how to improve the climate conversation within our local communities. And most of them don't even know that what they are facing in terms of shrinkage, the changing weather pattern. They don't even know that what is happening to their land and what is happening in terms of heat waves. They don't even know it is climate change. So there is need to actually raise awareness, to train. And one more thing I would like to say before I drop the mic is that these people actually have their own ways of actually adapting. We need to actually work with them. So it is on this way we can actually work together to improve it. Thank you so much. And
thank you
for
so much. No, thank you so much, Mr. Akintola. This excellent points raised. I just want to point out we have one pre-registered speaker. Our interpreters, thank you very much. They've had to leave. They've been with us for quite a while. Our third speaker, Ms. Julia Weatherhog from the Adaptation Division of UN Climate Change. We are running on borrowed time, so in that regard, please keep your remarks short, if I may ask. And for the questions in the chat, I'll try to summarize them in the end, and we'll conclude our session. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Moderator. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank Madam Under-Secretary General and the Office of the Special Advisor for hosting this event. I have listened with interest to the experiences of Mozambique and Senegal and would like to briefly discuss the UNFCCC's contribution to the interface of climate and food systems. In 2021, the World Bank estimated that around 260 million people will be forced to flee storms, heat waves, flooding, and drought by 2050 unless radical action is taken. Global losses from this are expected to be around 23 trillion USD. The same year, the SOFI report claimed that between 720 and 811 million people were facing hunger. These numbers clearly show that climate change, disasters, and food security are all interlinked, and that the world needs more integrated approaches to tackle these challenges. To this end, the Climate Resilient Food Systems Alliance was launched in 2021 during the UN Food Systems Summit, which I am sure that most of you are familiar with. The Climate Resilience Food Systems Summit Alliance is actually born with the intent of bringing together different actors with different comparative advantages and different expertise and portfolios to accelerate the pace towards climate resiliency worldwide. Our group currently comprises UN and non-UN organizations, civil society, member states, academia, and private sector, and is growing. A couple of focuses of the alliances are concentrated both on mitigation and adaptation efforts, but also on climate risk management, on innovative practices, and on integrated policies and plans. The Climate Resilient Food Systems Alliance actually is trying to synergize all the efforts to bring together an integrated set of solutions from which different states can pick and choose from, together with leveraging different advocacy efforts towards COP27. We're very happy to have as one of our partners the African Union, and we look forward to building this partnership together and learning more from the experiences of countries such as Mozambique and Senegal and Nigeria as well. Another initiative that is undergoing in the UNFCCC is the Nairobi Work Program. It has a very strong focus on agriculture and food security in order to create the latest knowledge in the areas of climate change, food systems, agriculture, etc., to inform countries' efforts in building their national adaptation plans and nationally determined contributions. Lastly, I would just like to briefly touch upon the Resilience Frontier Initiative, which is a collection of innovative solutions focused on mainstreaming regenerative food production, which addresses the perils facing future food security and sustainability through foresight methodologies that prioritize forward-looking actions, innovations, and frontier technologies. Lastly, I would just like to say that this year at COP27, there is this big focus on the Food Day, which we welcome, and we look forward to the negotiations leading up to that. we wish that we can bring together the voices of different stakeholders and especially the most vulnerable. For sure, the African perspective is one of great potentials and also great challenges. So we look forward to being able to partner together at this very important table. Over to you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you very much. So I'll close this session by just quickly pointing out certain topics that were raised both in the chat and also kind of summarizing what our speakers have said. We heard about innovative finance from ECA on the importance of being able to be flexible in order to get financing. We heard from our ambassadors, which was very interesting, about young people are not engaging in this sector. And somebody from the comments said there is information asymmetry for entrepreneurship. If people have the information and the potential that if young people have this information of the potential that this sector has in food systems, that they would be more willing to engage in it. But they just don't, farming is mostly associated with the old style with the old understanding of, poor subsistence farming. So increasing the information asymmetry. Mr. Akintola put forward a very interesting issue that's near and dear to my heart. We speak in these forums, but the people who are in the front lines, how are we engaging them? How are we engaging young people? How are we engaging our farmers who are being affected by this coming crisis and their lived crisis? And how are we going to incorporate their experiences in the policies and in the measures that we are introducing? We have, to finish off, we have the intervention from Ms. Weatherhog about COP and emphasizing the importance of food systems and the food day that is planned in Egypt. So with that, there is more that was in the chat, and I wish I could have delved a little bit into it and made this more interactive. Unfortunately, time is not on our side. So thank you very much for engaging in this session, and I hand back the session to Undersecretary Ms. Duarte. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bitsat, for an outstanding moderation of Subteam 4. I also thank all the speakers. Thank you for your participation. I believe that we can move to the last segment of this morning before the closing, of course. I would like to confirm before I go ahead, introducing or opening the next segment, if my dear brother Mayaki and my dear brother Maloka, they are on board. Can someone confirm, please?
They are, USG.
Thank you. So, good morning, Mayaki. Good morning, Maloka. It's a pleasure to...
Good morning. Good morning.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So, the next segment of today's high-level policy dialogue is an homage to our dear brother, Ibrahim Mayaki. Ibrahim Mayaki was the Chief Executive Officer of ALDE-NEPAD from 2009 to 2022. So with your permission, I will deliver my homage remarks to you, Mayaki.
Thank you.
Excellencies, dear colleagues, as we get to the final part of the high-level policy dialogue of the 2022 Africa Dialogue Series, we reach a part that is very special for me and for all the OSA team, the homage to Dr. Mayaki. The Office of the Special Advisor on Africa was created in 2003 to promote coordination of the United Nations system support to NEPAD. and was designated the focal point of the United Nations for relations with the NEPAD agency. During 13 of the 90 years since OSA was established, Dr. Mayaki was the head of the NEPAD agency, and afterwards, the head of the African Union Development Agency, AUDA-NEPAD. This tribute is a recognition by the United Nations of the role that Dr. Mayaki has played in promoting Africa's development. And if you allow me, I will now take off my hat as USG OSA and put my hat as Cristina Duarte, Pan-Africanist, colleague and friend, to deliver my remarks. My dear friend Mayaki, it is with an immense pleasure and honor that we gather here today to pay a more than deserved homage to you. It is an institutional recognition for your role leading OSA's key partner, but also a big thank you from all of us who are lucky enough to get to know you during this time, and from all of who did not know you personally, but benefit from your service to Africa. Paying this tribute as part of the Africa Dialogue series, and particularly during its high-level policy dialogue, could not be more appropriated. During your mandate, you made of policy and governance, which are the drivers of the Africa Dialogue series, one of your priorities. And you did it convinced that strong policies and institutions were the best way to achieve sustainable development in Africa. Africa has always been your passion, our passion. And I have the feeling that this common passion is what connected us from the beginning. Since you took your first step in positions of political leadership, you demonstrated your conviction that the success of an African nation entails a deep commitment to Pan-Africanism. You saw clear that diversity of our continent is its biggest wealth and not a cause of poverty. You knew that our multiple ethnicities, religions, language, origins are a strength that makes Africa versatile, open, and powerful culture. In this regard, you, my dear friend Mayaki, carry high the flag of Pan-Africanism when leading AUDA-NEPAD, convinced that if we focus on what united us, we would reach an African Renaissance. You fought for enhancing the regionalization process, increasing the integration of our frameworks, pursuing unity of our positions, knowing that if we achieve political alignments around strategic global issues that have been impacting and in many cases continue to impact Africa's development path, we would be a step closer to an empowered Africa that owns its present and its future. You became a strong African voice in the global arena, advocating for a better and fair economic order in which Africa would occupy the place it deserves. Your 13 years of leadership of AUDA-NEPAD have transformed the development branch of the African Union into an institution that has become the reference in strategic thinking and forward-looking with regards to Africa's future. These results were not achieved just by chance. They are a result of your personality, my dear friend Mayaki, full of perseverance, dedication, humility, compassion, honesty, trustworthiness, loyalty, sacrifice, service, and kindness. For this, for everything you have done for us and for Africa. Thank you, Mayaki. On behalf of OSA, of the United Nations, and of all of us believers in the Pan-Africanism, who know that we'll continue to have you a strong, insightful ally. And now I will put back on my hat as conductor of this session to give the floor to another good friend, another great partner. You know the saying, all good things come in threes. In the case of the global fight of Africa's sustainable development, those three are AUDA-NEPAD, OSA, and the African Peer Review Mechanism. Together, we have sought to promote Africa's empowerment, autonomy, and self-reliance. Together, we'll continue to fight for Africa's present and future. In this regard, it is my great pleasure to give the floor to my dear brother, Eddie Maloka, Chief Executive Officer of the Africa Peer Review Mechanism.
No, thank you
my
very
dear
much.
friend, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm taking the entire floor. Thank you very much, my dear sister and Your Excellency, Undersecretary General and the Special Advisor on Africa, Madam Christine Duarte. Thank you very much, my dear sister. And of course, it's also very nice to see my brother and elder brother and friend, Dr. Mayaki, on your screen. We've been missing each other here. And Your Excellencies who are here, I saw quite a number of permanent representatives earlier today. And so please really to all recognize them, the distinguished personalities, observers to the UN, colleagues of the African Union who are here, African experts, friends and ladies and gentlemen. So we really observe all the protocols that have been in place since the beginning of this webinar. Let me send you my greetings from Malawi in Equatorial Guinea, where, as you know, Your Excellencies, the African Union is holding its extraordinary summit focusing on two subjects. Today is the humanitarian affairs, and tomorrow the summit focuses on terrorism and unconstitutional change of government. So ordinarily, Dr. Mayaki should be sitting here enjoying this sun with us, but he's sitting somewhere enjoying his time. So I'm very, very jealous. But I wanted to say that we really miss you. I was looking for you actually today here in Malawi. And I've already thanked my sister, Christine Duarte, for inviting me. And once again to this series that has become so popular within such a short span of time. And it's really, this series have become a forum really for illuminating and energizing us as we reflect collectively with our partners on questions and challenges facing our continent, working together to find the solution. This year, Your Excellency, and rightly so, the African Union decided to devote its efforts to strengthening resilience in nutrition and food security. And of course, it was at the time we didn't know that food security will become so much of a geopolitical issue because that was before the outbreak of the conflict in Europe. But now it has, and really the foresight of our leaders to have chosen this topic was really timely. And I also want to thank you, Christine, for all the good words you have said about Dr. Mayaki. I've known him for many years, but also for this small gesture, for recognizing him for his role at NEPAD, which has now become AUDA-NEPAD. And I was talking to Commissioner Bankole today, and we were reminiscing about the role that Dr. Mayaki played, because I worked at NEPAD Secretariat myself before Dr. Mayaki came. And after NEPAD was formed, before the formation of the AU as such, it was during the transition. And after the AU was formed, and then in Durban at the second summit of the African Union, the heads of states took a decision to integrate NEPAD into the African Union. And really, we should commend Dr. Mayaki for having overseen this process and concluded it successfully, making NEPAD a program of the African Union. And really, we owe it to him, and we must recognize him for that. And you may not know, you probably know that Dr. Mayaki, when you go to Niger, his home country, and you go into the foreign ministry, and I took a picture I sent to him, his face is on the wall of the Ministry of Foreign, because he was a foreign minister at a very young age, I guess, because he's always handsome, he's got a deceiving look, but there he looked even much younger and more handsome, and as a younger person. And so really he was his country's foreign minister. He also served as his country's prime minister. So when he came to NEPAD, already he brought that experience with him. And really, I can say that we're very lucky as a continent, and indeed privileged as the African Union, to have had such a distinguished African assigned to lead one of the organs. And of course, he's distinguished himself further in how he led this organ. And how appropriate it is to bid him farewell and grant him this recognition that is due to him at this webinar, whose theme is the subject matter that preoccupied him during his tenure at ODA NEPAD. I would like also, Your Excellency, to take this opportunity to commend, as previous speakers did, the African Development Bank, which of course we as the African Peer Review Mechanism, we work with them as a strategic partner for announcing the $1.5 billion African Emergency Food Production Facility that will effectively support 20 million smallholder farmers in acquiring seeds for the production of food that will guarantee Africa's food security and allow surplus to be exported, thereby expanding trade volumes with markets far and near through the African Continental Free Trade Area. Smallholder farmers have traditionally been the backbone of our largely agrarian economies. Unfortunately, our support for them is not commensurate with the vital role they play in helping their produce reach our dining tables. With huge areas of arable land and beautiful sunlight, Africa has the potential to feed itself sustainably and banish the specter of hunger. In the 21st century, it is heartbreaking to see that we are still grappling with access to nutrition when excess food in the developed world regularly goes to waste, and some of it, we see it in the dustbins, waste bins, as we go around in the pavements of some of these countries. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, now is the time to recommit to the comprehensive African Agriculture Development Program, CADAP, which is of course, we can say, as Dr. Mayaki, you are not living with the name, because really it's a flagship project of NEPAD. Through earmarking at least 10% of our budgets for agricultural growth and transformation to ensure that we are resilient in the face of pandemics, climate change, wars, and other unforeseeables. Our pursuit of resilience must be multi-pronged and manifested at the political, economic, and social levels. Indeed, if we are to achieve resilience in the agricultural domain, greater attention must be paid to gender equality, because women produce around 70% of what is on our plates. However, they possess only 20% of the land. When we know the World Economic Forum, allowing women to own the land they till and supplying them with finance will result in agricultural production that is between 20 to 30% greater. Female ownership of land and better resources at their disposal will lead to the reduction of hunger by 17%. It bears repeating that Africa's development efforts should consistently uphold the principle of leaving no one behind. Indeed, inclusive participation in and benefits from development are not just morally right, but also economically sensible. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the African Union, which celebrates its 20th anniversary this year, as you know, has been driving Africa's development to realize continental and our global and the continental and the global blueprints, African Agenda 2063 and Agenda 2030. Though much remains to be done, its achievements have been impressive. The ODA NEPAD has spearheaded life-changing initiatives in domains as desperate as food systems, economic growth, and job creation, health systems, and of course in the area of education as well. Its extensive network of partners around the world and deep presence on the continent have allowed for the design and execution of major projects such as the Program for Infrastructural Development and what also they call Africa Creates Jobs. The success story that is ODA NEPAD is largely attributed to its CEO, our dear brother, Dr. Ibrahim Mayaki. His single-minded commitment to multifaceted development on the continent for more than a decade has been rewarded with accolades, commendation, and admiration by us on the continent, our partners all over the world, the media community, and of course, indeed, our heads of states and beyond. An Afro-optimist at heart, Dr. Mayaki has consistently defended Africa and pleaded for a different type of narrative to be written about it in various international fora, even when such advocacy went against the grain or what was regarded as somewhat curious. After being in charge of implementing his development agenda for 13 years, Dr. Mayaki recently finished, as you know, his tenure of NEPAD at NEPAD as the CEO. And indeed, I want to join my sister and also on behalf of the APRM community and on my own behalf, I'd like to applaud Dr. Mayaki for his distinguished service and wish him well as he embarks on a new chapter of his long and illustrious career. I'm pleased, Your Excellencies, that he is being, his successor is our dear sister, Dr. Nardos Bekele, a seasoned professional that is equally bullish about Africa and has, of course, already taken the reins as CEO of Outer NEPAD. I wish to congratulate her and extend to her my best wishes as well as firm support. I'm confident that she will build on the momentum created by Dr. Mayaki and lead Outer NEPAD even to greater height. Fortunately, I know the two colleagues, Dr. Mayaki, I worked with him throughout the 13 years when he was at NEPAD. I was at some point of that. During that period, I was in the South African Foreign Service, so we gave him all the support. And he was also the acting APRM where I am. So APRM was in a crisis, collapsing. Heads of state called upon him to babysit it, and until they appointed somebody. And when I started and took my assignment at the APRM, he's the one who was walking me around the building, showing me and introducing me to staff. And of course, I look back with some fond memories to those to that moment. So really to thank him. And of course, we have been neighbors since then. We are in the same building, we meet each other, and we constantly have lunch and dinner together. So we are really going to miss you, and we'll miss a friend, we'll miss a brother, we'll miss a neighbor. Dr. Nardos, of course, we also know her. I know her. She was she's quite well known in the UN. She worked at the UN Rest Rep in South Africa. So we had the privilege of working with her when she was at the UN, myself in my current position at the APRM. And we're quite happy that it's her, somebody who's familiar with the AU and a dear sister who's taking on this responsibility. And I must say that Dr. Mayaki belongs to a caliber of leaders. They don't retire. They say they retire. So they take new tires. They retire. And so we will continue to work with him for a better Africa. And so really we look forward to continuing to work with him. And then on this occasion, I also want to wish you all a happy Africa Month. God bless you. And thank you for your kind attention.
You're muted, USG.
Thank you. Thank you very much, my dear brother Maloka. And now it is my honor to give the floor to my dear brother and friend, Ibrahim Mayaki, former CEO of Outer NEPAD, and always one of the greatest Pan-Africanists. Mayaki, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, USG Cristina Duarte, dear sister, because I really consider you sincerely like a sister. We have known each other before, and we have created these bonds in other circumstances, but always guided by Pan-Africanism and fighting for Africa's interests. And I define generally my Afro-optimism as a fight for Africa's interest, and we really link together on that dimension. And let me also greet my dear friend and comrade, Professor Maloka, with whom we also have had interactions in other circumstances and before he came to APRM. And as you have noticed, the way he has transformed APRM today in a very strong institution, widely and recognized on the global scene, is a very important achievement. And my dear sister, let me also congratulate you for this Africa Dialogue series, which is really a success and which has an impact in Africa, beyond Africa, and an impact in promoting African ideas. And on this point, I would like to mention the issue of ownership. When I think about what you do, I think fundamentally about ownership, and it is a value which really is, especially now, extremely important. Let me also recognize all the excellencies, permanent representatives, and all the colleagues who are here present. Where I listened to some of the discussions, and I was really impressed by the depth of the analysis and the quality of the recommendations. So I'm humbled really by this recognition. And you know, generally what happens when there is this kind of recognition and homage, you start writing notes and you think about what you are saying. And when you are on the spot, what you wanted to say is changing somehow. And it is changing fundamentally because of the emotions that you have. So your rational mind has produced notes, but your limbic brain with its emotions leads you in another way, which is a way closer to sincerity than the notes that have been produced. So I would like to mention the few things that I've learned in this journey. The few things that I've learned are fundamentally the consequence of the interactions I've had, particularly, for example, with you, USG Cristina Duarte. I remember very well long hours of discussions when you were minister, and we were talking about institutional development. And you led me to read much more about institutional development and know much more about it than I knew then. And it had a very important consequence on the way I was framing my issues. So if I list the things that I've learned, the first one is really that we need institutional innovations in a continent where 2/3 of the population is under 25. And so our governance systems as they are, and Professor Maloka, we have discussed that before, our governance systems as they are not adapted to our demographic configuration. Why? Because this majority of youngsters want results now. They are not waiting for 5 years or 10 years. And as they want results now, whether it is in jobs, in energy, etc., we need to find a way of governing which associates them to the design of public policies. So that's what I call co-production of public policies. And this is what will guarantee a certain type of stability in our institutions. So there is a vast domain of institutional innovation which is open to us. And everyone will win from that. It's a consequence of the demographic challenge that we have, but we will all win, and Africa will win, and Africa will win speedily. Because if we look at the way the continent is moving today, the speed of startups, the imagination of our micro and small entrepreneurs is really considerable. And we are leading the world in many advanced technologies which are not sufficiently communicated through these startups, whether they are in urban areas or in peri-urban areas. But I learned a lot regarding institutional innovations and the necessity to move towards that. But the second point where I did learn a lot is that coming from West Africa and going to Southern Africa, I used, to talk when I was in West Africa about Africa. But I realized when I came to Southern Africa that I only knew a part of Africa. So my reflections, my prior reflections on Africa were logically not correct, because my knowledge of a continent was limited to a part of a continent. So, and staying at Ouda NEPAD, which was NEPAD Secretariat before, in Southern Africa, opened my eyes to Africa differently. So it allowed me to learn. So you see, most of the things I've gone through in that journey have been about learning. It allowed me to learn what Africa was. It allowed me to look at the cultural dynamics, the issues of fragmentation of our territories. And it reinforced in me that necessity to break fragmentation, which is a consequence of a Berlin conference, which did divide Africa in artificial boundaries. And this presence in this part of a continent, and the fact of going all through the continent for all the projects that we had, did give a concrete sense of what fighting against fragmentation did mean. And that's one of the reasons that we promoted all the issue of corridors and in infrastructure development, and supported by the African Development Bank, by the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, and supported from the start by the Office of a Special Advisor for Africa. So I learned what fighting against fragmentation meant, and how it was equal to Pan-Africanism and fighting for the interests of a continent. The third thing I learned, which was quite important for me, was that none of our problems is monosectoral. You see, we talk about agriculture, then we talk about energy, we talk about trade, we talk about transport, etc. But evidently, there needs to be projects in all these domains. But the challenges are multi-sectoral. And agricultural transformation has to do, evidently, with energy. It has to do with water. It has to do with rural infrastructure. It has to do with skills. It has to do with trade. It has to do with technological innovation, because many of our small-scale farmers who produce 80% of the food we eat use smartphones and phones to communicate and have data on the prices of the markets, which are not far from where they live. So this multi-sectorality of development challenges was a learning process for me. And then it brings me back to the issue of institutional innovations. Many of our institutions are framed to respond to sectoral issues. And we need to move to how we can respond to multi-sectoral issues. And this has been a learning, and we have tried with our colleagues in Outer Nepal to see how we can aggregate together and have a systemic approach. And it is interesting to see, but the UN Food Systems Summit and its conclusions has put that focus, which was already put in the SDGs, that focus on a systemic approach. But the recognition of a systemic approach institutionally still needs to move forward. But I learned a lot. The following thing I learned was that as a small entity, the African Union Development Agency has less than 200 staff, covering 55 countries. When you have 200 staff, a budget of roughly 30 million, I mean, you cannot have a footprint everywhere with projects. So in order to be relevant and pertinent, you need to find a way of demonstrating that you are relevant and pertinent. And what I learned was that we needed to move from the what to do, to how to do it, and focus on how to do renewable energy that can help increase agricultural productivity. And then once we had this how, we could replicate it. And that's really the story of the agency. We moved from the what, we had the NEPAD program, we had Agenda 2063, etc. So the what is there. The question was the how. How could we better implement in order to have concrete examples of success that could be replicated, and demonstrating to our ambassadors in Addis, who are the permanent representative, that the how was important because of the replication. It could allow us to demonstrate the validity and the pertinence of the development agency. So it is not a development agency as other development agencies, which have hundreds of millions of dollars, etc. It is a development agency which has to really focus on working on the how. So by working on the how, it has to prioritize knowledge fundamentally. So that's and African knowledge. African knowledge doesn't mean that it excludes other knowledges. No, it means how we put together all the other knowledges so that we construct our knowledge. And this is where the agency is going. And I'm absolutely convinced that my successor, Nardos Bekele Thomas, is also convinced of these ideas and will bring more in terms of enhancing the approaches. So these are the things I learned. And lastly, I would like to mention synergy, and synergy based on the quality of a partnership, on intelligent partnerships, and really recognize the role you have been playing, USG, dear Christina, in enhancing this issue of synergy. And synergy fundamentally means that we, like in a brainstorming session, we build on the ideas of each one of us in order to have a common goal. We have differentiated roles, but we have a common goal. And moving towards that common goal, we have a kind of team Africa. Europe defined the team Europe, but I must be frank, they didn't invent that term. I don't have time to go into the details. But today, we have a team Africa with yourself, Christina, with the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, with African Union Commission, with AUDA NEPAD. That Team Africa is a winning team. It is a winning team. Different roles, common goal, but that team is going to win. I'm absolutely convinced of that. I'm convinced of that because we are no longer in a situation where we depend automatically on what the others think about us. We have confidence in what we do. And that confidence has been built over the years. We know that we have Africans, very renowned Africans, specialized in all the possible domains in the world. But just to mention one point, the most brilliant physicist in the United States today is a youngster from my country, from Niger, who is in California. He was in MIT, but he comes from a very normal background. But like him, there are dozens, hundreds everywhere. So no one can tell us how we should think. Because we have this network of Africans all over the world who have multiple ideas, who have been confronted to multiple challenges, and who really can transform the continent. So if Team Africa works well, it will really transform the continent in something which is based on its interest. And as we see the geopolitization of aid now, and as we know that aid will fade away, and I don't think it is a bad thing, because if we look at the figures of the Development Assistance Committee of OECD, I mean, aid is not really a transformative dimension from now. So it is our capacity, our intelligence, our networks, our dynamics as a Team Africa, our confidence in ourselves that will really transform the continent. And in that domain, let me applaud OSA, let me applaud you and your teams for the fantastic work you are doing. And I'm humbled, I'm touched, and happy at the same time. I'm happy to see this happening, and really, I would like to end by a quote of a Spanish philosopher, Ortega y Gasset, who says that, amongst all the changes that exist in the world that can happen, you can break them in two categories. The first category is when something changes in the world. The second category is when the world is changing. Now, things are not changing in Africa. Africa is changing the world. Thank you very much again. Thank you, really. I'm very touched. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mayaki, for your always wise words. And I do hope, as I said, that we'll continue working together for Africa. I'm sure. I'm sure. As our dear brother Maloka say, you are just changing tires. That's it. You will keep yourself in the road. I'm sure. And now, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the time has come for us to close this year's Africa Dialogue series. And in this regard, it is my honor and a pleasure, before going to the video message of my dear sister, Ambassador Fatma Mohamed, our dear sister Vera Songwe, she managed from Malabo to connect. Vera, are you here with us? Yes, I saw you.
I am here. I am here.
Thank you very much, Vera, my dear sister. So we move to the closing session of this wonderful Africa Dialogue series. So it is my pleasure to give the floor to our dear sister Vera Songwe, the Under-Secretary General and General Secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa. Vera, the floor is yours.
Congratulations to the banker of the year.
You should not speak. Thank you so much. Thank you. I was just about to start by saying, my dear Christina, I think, yes, we go a long way. We have a long conversation to go, but very difficult to follow. Of course, always very difficult to follow Dr. Mayaki. And let me, I know that this is not part of what I'm supposed to be talking about because we're still talking about health and nutrition. And I listened to Eddie as well, and of course the sort of eloge, like we say, right? Where we're recognizing a good friendship, francophone speaking person that Eddie was giving you, and I must just associate, I think, all of the Economic Commission for Africa with everything that Eddie said, everything that Christina has said, and a lot more. And to say that, you know, our team is going to be limping a little bit. We welcome Nados, of course, but we are going to miss you. And so we are trying our best to find ways of keeping you with us. And so hopefully we can find a few secrets, Christina and myself, to keep you around. I think you ended by talking about all the innovations that the continent has and the fact that the continent is going to demonstrate to the world that we can do this and we can do it the way we want to. We are now living through the Ukraine war or the Russian crisis, depending on how one wants to call it. Either way, there is a war and there are guns ablaze some parts in the world. Again, Africa is subject to what we will call an exogenous shock that has nothing to do with us and where we have to then respond. Who would have thought that 2008 will be child's play when we look at today, right? Professor Mayaki, we were all there in 2008 when we were talking about the food crisis and all the tensions that could arise because of it. But here we are again. When we picked the theme of the year, 17th of January, 19th of January, the guns had not started. The guns started on the 24th of February. And on the 24th of February, we were kind of saying, you know, how do we reset Africa's economy? How do we go get SDRs? How do we do all these things to take off again? Clearly, none of that has happened. What we have seen instead is essentially our theme of the year, and a lot of the work that we had done and a lot of the positive energy that we had generated around ensuring that nutrition, good agriculture, food, we're back on the agenda in a way that was going to be irreversible, and now again on the threat. And we're asking ourselves, you know, do we actually have the kind of resilient systems? Our economies so far have been resilient, right? Yes, we have gone from 4 to 21 countries that are in debt distress, but you know, we have Sri Lanka, we have Pakistan, and we have many more coming. Thank God none of them yet on the continent. If you remember, Christina, we've all been waiting for the African country to unravel. But they are unraveling around us, not that we wish Pakistan or Sri Lanka or any other country the ills that they're going through, but at least Africa is still standing. And I think that that's the resilience we've demonstrated from COVID, 25 years since we saw last recession. But here we are, again, with inflation coming. Africa has at least 20 countries where the food component of the inflation basket is above 50% of that basket, which means that as we start feeling the pressures of the food crisis, and remember again, food prices today are higher than they were in 2008, we're beginning to see an additional almost 48 million more Africans falling into nutrition, undernutrition and hunger strikes or hunger stresses. So this brings to the question, you know, why, and none of us would have imagined that two small countries or one small country called Ukraine had this much impact on our economies as African economies, and that we depended that much on them for our food and for our livelihoods. The food and the FAO has shown that, you know, our prices are 30% higher than where they were in 2008. So that's how much higher and how much the struggle or the battle upwards is going to be. We are also struggling with fertilizer prices in Russia.
But again, and I think that this is part of where Professor Mayaki was talking maybe about some of the policy directions that we need to look at. If you look at the conversations around, where are we on the resilience systems, as the concept note talked about a little bit. If we talk about agriculture, we talk about mechanization, we'll talk about then the use of fertilizer, we'll talk about the use of machinery, we'll talk about the use of improved seeds. All of us, Christina, yourself, Professor Mayaki, Eddie, all of us in our different confinements, and a lot of the conversations that have happened in the last, and Christina, I must say congratulations again for this is ADS, I mean the dialogue series, this particular one. I haven't listened to all of it. I listened to a small snippet yesterday because I was threatening to come on, or you were threatening to call me to come on. So I listened to some of the conversations yesterday, and then I've listened to a little bit today. I think that where we are going is a place where, if we look at 2008, we came out of 2008 with Rwanda now being able to stop being a rice importer and become almost a rice exporter. We came out of 2008 with Burkina Faso. Yes, Burkina Faso is struggling, the stresses that it's struggling today, but actually Burkina Faso turned around its horticulture industry. It's now, it exports strawberries. It's sort of organized a system that is much better than it was before. We had Mali. Unfortunately, again, Mali is in a little bit of trouble, but all these are sort of precursors. Mali improved its rice production from about 4 or 5 tons per hectare to almost 10 because of improved seeds that were designed in Africa. We were no longer fighting, or we are no longer fighting GMO. We're now in Africa consuming African produced, African researched seeds that are weather resistant but are not endangering our health. We are now on the continent talking about fertilizers whose DNA match the soils in which we are planting what we want to plant. This is the kind of innovation, I think, that Professor Mayaki was talking about, and saying, Africa can. And this team Africa that you're talking about is a team Africa that is beginning to build and get bigger. I have the privilege of sitting on the Agra Food Price Committee with the President Obasanjo. And every year we look at the new innovations that are coming out around agriculture. And then one sits back and one wonders, how come we are not food self-sufficient? And this does not mean that every country must produce the food that it needs, because this would be terrible. This is not good economics, and this will be bad politics. But this means that Africa as a whole needs to be able to at least produce as much food. Zimbabwe, Ethiopia, they can give us the wheat we need. They can give us the grain we need. Malawi, of course, can give us the maize. Mali can give us the maize. I think that if we were to sit down today and remap Africa's surfaces and say, what is it that we need, and how can we, inside the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, provide and produce for what Africa needs, we will be able to do it, and do it sufficiently well and satisfactorily. And this goes to and this will be my last and one point, the point that Professor Mayaki made about Africa must do it for itself. I think we have gone through COVID where we saw nobody coming to help Africa, but of course with COVID, nobody could actually move, right? We were all sort of sitting where we were. But we have now seen the Ukraine crisis. Ukraine gets $5 billion a month from the developed world to sort of help finance the process of whatever it is that Ukraine is doing. $5 billion a month, I want to repeat that. We have gotten, since the crisis started, somewhere in the order of 33.6 billion, maybe if one were generous, 50 billion for the continent. I think it is clear that nobody is coming with additional financial resources for Africa if Africa cannot raise its own additional financial resources. And so we must stop waiting, asking, begging. I think we need to get to a point where we say, again, in agriculture, when we do the data, Africa produces more fertilizer than it consumes. We are exporting fertilizer to the United States. We're exporting fertilizer to Brazil. Our markets internally are broke. We must fix them and ensure that this kind of fragmentation doesn't lead then to us begging for fertilizer when we have it on our continent. And just because of lack of better logistics or improved trading systems, we end up being putting out a begging bowl again. I think we can change these policies. I think with better governance, we can improve the way fertilizer is distributed, used, and consumed on our continent. And if we were to do that, my sense is that even if the way, and we hope, because we all want the wars to stop, but even if we had conflicts further afield, they will not be affecting us at the rate. We are the only continent that is going to go on its knees if we can't get fertilizer out. We are the only continent that is going on its knees because there's no grain. whereas we are the continent that has 5 times more arable land than anybody else. There has to be, I mean, this kind of sort of, what can I call it? I don't know, I cannot use the word in this forum. It's not acceptable. We cannot continue like this. And I think we do need to figure out how we change it. And then finally, the theme of the year, Christina, for you and me, it's really about women, no? It is about the women who go to the farm and do not have access to land. It is about the women whose labor is not being accounted for sufficiently. And so therefore they are not getting the right incomes. It is about all the work we've done, Professor Mayaki, on cross-border difficulties so that we cannot take goods from Nigeria to Cameroon or from Cote d'Ivoire to Senegal in a way that does not have all the impediments that are created. So I think that for us to be able to sort of live to the spirit of the theme of the year, I just came in Malabo where we are talking about humanitarian crises. Africa does not have to have a full humanitarian crisis. I think that it goes to the heart of our governance if we are still worrying about that. And to say, how can we do better? How can we make this market mechanisms that instead of humanitarian crises are actually prosperity, value creation, and value addition for many more of us when you look at the kinds of green soils we have. So I think, again, for the women, this theme is even more for us. We have gone through COVID where the girls are out of school, and so they hopefully can go back to the land, but they have to go to the land that has good governance. They have to go back to land where they can own it and where they can produce it in a way that actually delivers better value. So I think at the end of the day, we come back to this gender conversation and how, even with this theme, we can make sure that women get their fair share and are represented adequately, as Professor Mayaki has always done and will continue to do as we continue. So I want to stop again by congratulating you, Christina, for a really, really insightful dialogue, but then to urge all of us to say, why are we not asking the right questions? And if we were asking the right questions, can we get the right answers, as Professor Mayaki has asked us to show and demonstrate? So thank you so much again and for having me, and I wait for you to conclude. Thanks for listening.
Vera, my dear sister, thank you very much. Thank you very much. As always, brilliant aspects, brilliant remarks. You ask the tough questions, you're right. Stop begging, and we need to ask the correct questions. And above all, we need to adopt a from within approach going forward. The solution, the problem is here in Africa, but the solution too. So thank you very much. We are about to close this year's Africa Dialogue series. The last remarks are from our dear sister, Ambassador Fatima Mohamed, but she was not able to be with us live, but so we are going to listen Ambassador Fatima Mohamed closing remarks through a video. So thank you again. I would much appreciate it if the front office can play the video. Thank you very much.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for me to deliver the closing remarks of the high-level policy dialogue of the Africa Dialogue Series 2022. Let me start by thanking the leadership and the teams of the Office of the Special Advisor on Africa, the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, the Food and Agriculture Organization, the World Food Programme, the International Labour Organization, UNECA, and AUDA-NIPAD for their excellent support and continued partnership, and for the tireless efforts to make the 2022 edition of the Africa Dialogue Series a success. The aim in this year's ADS session was to promote the achievement of the first aspiration of Agenda 2063, which envisions a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development, as well as its key goal, which aims to ensure a continent of healthy and well-nourished citizens. This aspiration of Agenda 2063 is directly linked with Sustainable Development Goal 2, which aims to end hunger and malnutrition by 2030 and ensure sustainable food production systems. It is also aligned with the AU 2022 theme of the year, strengthening resilience in nutrition and food security on the African continent, strengthening agro-food systems, health, and social protection systems for the acceleration of human, social, and economic capital development. For an entire month, a number of activities were organized, including interactive discussions, knowledge sharing, and the development of knowledge products. The organizers collectively have demonstrated an exemplary partnership to advocate for building greater resilience in food systems in Africa and for adequate and affordable nutrition for all. The activities of ADS culminated in a 2-day high-level policy dialogue on the theme Building Resilience in Nutrition, Accelerate Africa's Human Capital and Social Economic Development. It also focused on 4 thematic areas to address the interlinkages, interdependencies, and complementarities among different components of the food systems in Africa. As we bring this impactful knowledge sharing and exchange forum to a close, we've been able to obtain a number of recommendations drawing from the discussions during the sessions convened throughout the month. A resounding message was that of a call to action and the transformation of our aspirations to concrete and tangible actions. While in the short term, we need to minimize disruptions in critical intra-African food supply chains due to COVID and other challenges, in the medium to long term, there's a need to enhance coordination and integration of global support. And we looked at how the UN development system can be leveraged to improve the impact of applied solutions to ensure alignment of recommended policies with national priorities, while putting more emphasis on a number of areas that were identified. These recommendations will be incorporated in the outcome publication of the ADS 2022, which will be shared in the coming weeks. We hope that this outcome will be used as a resource to build on the already existing collective initiatives. I wish to conclude by thanking all our speakers, panelists, and discussants who have enriched the ADS debate with their views, observations, and brilliant interventions. The interviews and webinars during the past 4 weeks have been truly enriching. Our gratitude also goes to all our participants and the audience who have interacted with us on social media and provided critical comments. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you all at the Africa Dialogue Series in 2023. Thank you for your attention.
So thank you. This was the message of our dear sister Ambassador Fatima Mohamed. I would like to take the opportunity to underscore again that Africa Dialogue Series have been organized with the African Union through the African Union Permanent Observer Mission in New York. They are our permanent partner, co-organizer of these flagship projects of OSA. Having said that, now I declare close the Africa Dialogue Series 2022 edition. Thank you very much. And to close it, let's just play a video on food, energy, and climate nexus. Thank you very much to everybody for your support and participation. Thank you.
Agriculture is the foundation many African livelihoods are built on. But that foundation is cracking. With climate change affecting farmers' abilities to efficiently produce, store, and transport their products, Africa needs concerted investment so that these cracks don't grow. Small farm holders own most of the agricultural land in Africa, and without access to electricity, continue to use hand tools to plant and harvest their crops. To make matters worse, only 5% of all agricultural land is irrigated, meaning 95% of farms are reliant on rainfall alone. This dependence on rainfall hinders farmers' ability to adapt to the disastrous effects of climate change. Without adaptation, food production plummets as a result, further exacerbated by increasing populations and extreme weather events. Many farmers lack access to reliable electricity for cold storage facilities. And with produce being harvested by hand, much of the food never makes it to market. More forests must then be cleared to make room for arable land to consistently meet food demands. Without electricity, post-harvest losses account for nearly $4 billion US in lost profits every year. But with the right investments in reliable energy access, seamless connections to marketplaces, and value addition in agricultural value chains, food systems can be better equipped. Our first move should be to structure farming cooperatives to create economies of scale in both production and value addition. Roadways must be improved to reduce travel time to marketplaces. Energy mini-grids can be the key to create sustainable livelihoods and build community resilience through efficient food production, water use, processing, and value addition. Private investors are willing to take on some infrastructure improvements, but large-scale changes will require governmental action. Finally, and critically, investments in irrigation will not only enhance crop yields by as much as 400%, but will also help African farmers better adapt to climate change. With a nexus approach in place focusing on energy, food systems, and climate adaptation, millions of Africans will be able to weather the looming crisis that threatens their livelihoods. Join us. Let's build the Africa we want, and let's build the Africa that the world needs.
Thank you. Closed.
Thank you. Thanks, Christina. Have a good weekend.